Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Naruto gave pleasure to all Godess at Percy Jackson? Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. Now enjoy the video. Looking back at things, I realize that the only reason everyone I ever cared about is dead, is because of me. Had I never been born, or at the very least never crossed paths with them all, then maybe would they have been spared? It's not I can change anything now anyway, they died, and for what? So one measly and pathetic demigod could wallow in his own self-pity at having not been able to save his friends and family against the monsters that hide in the shadows, and those that reside up in the sky. I should have known things would have ended up like this, but then again I'm not a seaweed brain for nothing. I tried everything, I really did, but it seems like all of my efforts were in vain. Now, laying here amongst all of these mutilated corpses of brave kids forced too young to become heroes for parents that barely even acknowledge them, I realize that had I given myself up sooner for the safety of them all, the only real casualty would have been me. Of course, I'm not that stupid as to believe that Gia would have kept her word after having killed me, but swearing on the river Styx was something that everyone took seriously. I doubt Gia would have broken her word then. Oh well, it's all over now, and even as I lay here on the bloodied earth with a dead but wise girl, I can finally smile for once since I defeated Gia and put an end to this tiring war that brought only pain and death to those fighting in it. I can finally smile now that I can stop fighting for once in my life and rest, and even better, with my best friend in my arms. She's always looking after me, even now that she's dead and I'm only minutes away from joining her. Annabeth Chase was one of the greatest best friends I could have ever asked for, always trying, and failing, to keep me out of unnecessary trouble. She had been my girlfriend for a short time before both of us realized that it just wasn't working out, and could you imagine the surprise we had when we realized that it was because we were both attracted to people of the same sex? It was hilarious, really. I mean, for once in my life, I figured out something first, rather than having Annabeth explain it to me after having teased me about it for a bit at first. We had been watching the waves back at camp during one of the rare peaceful moments we had due to the looming war. Annabeth had been leaning on my shoulder as I held her hand in mine, mindlessly rubbing circles on her scarred yet smooth skin. "Do you love me?" I had been confused and slightly hurt at the question. I mean, did falling into Tartarus not been enough to assure Annabeth that I loved her immeasurably? I had risked my life countless times for both her and camp. Was everything I had done not enough for her? I pulled my hand back. "What are you talking about? Of course, I do." "Then why is it that it's not enough for me, for both of us?" I had been shocked. Was she saying what I think she was saying? "Annabeth, what are you saying?" She had lifted her head from my shoulder then, and turned her beautiful stormy gray eyes at me, locking me in place with its weight. "I'm not sure, Percy, but I just feel like the love we have for each other isn't the love that Grover and Juniper have for each other." Shock and hurt must have shown on my face because she hurried to explain. She quickly shifted her body to fully look at me as she held my face in her hands, looking at me with as much love as she could muster, making it seem like she was holding the world in her hands with how much love and care she was looking at me with. "Percy, there is no doubt in my mind that I love you, simply that the love I feel for you, that you feel for me, is that of siblings, partners, best friends, and just a deep and powerful love in general. I would give up my life for you, and I know you would do the same for me, for anyone else if need be, but I just feel wrong calling you my lover. I just want to be friends, please, Percy." I had closed my eyes as tears slipped through, leaning into her hands as I nuzzled her warmth. I blocked out the world momentarily as I thought hard about what Annabeth had just told me, the girl in question waiting patiently for my response as she used her thumb to wipe away my tears. Thoughts raced through my head at this new discovery. Had this all been a lie then? With the war looming, it didn't seem like the best time to be figuring this out, but then again it seemed to just make sense. Memories flashed rapidly in my mind as I tried to make sense of her words. Was the love I felt for her really that of friends, powerful as it was? And then, like a stray lightning bolt had hit me square in the chest, I stared wide-eyed back at Annabeth as wet lashes gave a slightly uncomfortable feeling to my face. Now that I thought about it, it did seem wrong that we acted like lovers, not that my love for Annabeth had suddenly changed or disappeared, rather I changed. I finally understood what Annabeth was trying to say and was about to speak when one memory in specific came rushing back at him. Oh gods. There's no way. How had he missed this? How had Annabeth missed this? It was nothing special really, just a normal day in a camp full of ADHD demigod kids who were rushing to prepare for a full-on war against Gia and her army of monsters. The seven had been making some adjustments to the Argo when I had fell from the ladder with a small shout of surprise. Let it be known that I didn't let out a high-pitched scream as I fell down from the high ladder, because why was I even so high up where that drama queen could so easily fry my bones? Both Jason and Frank had flown up into the sky to try and catch me, one using the wind to fly and another shapeshifting into a large dragon. Why? I have no clue. The funny thing about it all was that I could have just used the water in the air to stop my fall, but apparently, none of us thought of that, and so I continued to fall as both Jason and Frank collided with one another and flew off to opposite sides with pained grunts because Frank, you seriously couldn't have picked a more smaller or fluffy looking animal. The girls had stopped working as well, but of course not to help me. Oh no, I'm totally fine. Instead, they stopped to watch me with amusement in their eyes as Leo, my beautiful fire-burning savior, leapt off the side of the ship and dove straight for me. At this point, Annabeth and all of the other girls were openly laughing at me as Leo finally collided with me and teasingly told me to hold on, which I took as the go-ahead to strap my body to his like a baby koala. Leo had laughed softly next to my ear as he slowly but clumsily stopped our descent towards the ground, because who puts the Argo so high up? I mean, couldn't they have just landed it on the ground? We both ungracefully fell to the ground as Leo wasn't that strong to carry another person twice his size and still land perfectly, and so Leo fell on his back as I laid on his chest. Silence echoed back at us as we both tried to catch our breath, both for different reasons. Said silence was broken when both Jason and Frank came back arguing about paying attention in air traffic, and honestly I couldn't help to do anything but laugh as I picked my head up from Leo's chest to look him in the eyes. Soon everyone was laughing and everyone was back to teasing me for being such a damsel in distress. Looking back at that memory, I remember Leo helping me up and how he stayed stuck to my side for a moment longer as we both enjoyed the warmth of the other. Annabeth had crashed in between us as Piper carried her on her back, both laughing as they imitated me and Leo. Annabeth playing yours truly, Piper playing Leo, and Hazel, that sweet precious girl, had been switching between playing both Frank and Jason. It was funny and one of the precious moments we had before it all went to hell, and now that I pay attention to the details, Piper and Annabeth had been a little more closer than necessary and they had both, quite cutely, pressed their cheeks together as they laughed at all of us boys for being so stupid. I laugh as I all but leap into Annabeth's arms as I hug her tightly. I get it all now. I should have seen it sooner, forgive me? Annabeth had been so confused and I could tell that I was going to have to explain everything to her later, but for now, she smiled and nodded as she hugged me back. Always, seaweed brain. I mean, I guess we both kind of knew it, even in the beginning, that it just wasn't going to work out, but we just kept getting drawn back towards each other again and again. Tears rolled down my dirt-smudged face as I turned to look at the beautiful and stunning girl that repeatedly saved my life and had my back when no one else did. I choked back a sob as my hand numbly strokes back dust-covered, golden-curled locks, away from still teary lashes and a peacefully smiling face. Yeah, it hurts a lot, but it's okay because soon I'll be able to ask for forgiveness once I join everyone down in the underworld. That sounds nice, right, wise girl? It's so quiet, I hate it. I hate this silence so much. I wish it didn't have to end like this, but Gia couldn't even give me that much. It's a good thing then, that I made her stupid dirt face one with the earth again. Oh gods, it hurts to breathe. I thought I had already coughed up all the blood in my lungs, but apparently not. Gods. I was hoping I would at least look presentable when I died, but this is just sad. Mom, I miss my mom. Paul and Estelle too. They didn't deserve to die, not like that. I made sure to torture Gia a little more just for that. Sally and Paul had died in a targeted attack from both Tartarus and Gaia. Both had been bitter about my previous escape from their clutches. Blinking sluggishly up at the darkening sky, a shaky, scarred hand reaches up as if to touch the awakening stars winkling back at him. Home. I just want to go home. And with that last thought in mind, I close my eyes one last time as I tighten my grip around Annabeth's waist and my hand drops back down to the floor, having failed to reach for comfort up above. And so no one was conscious nor alive to see when a blinding white light abruptly flashed in, so powerful that the earth trembled and the air wavered. Standing in all their glory were all of the almighty Olympians, all of whom looked disturbingly out of place, amongst all of the war wreckage and cooling corpses, with their clean and impeccable silk clothing. Sharp intakes of breath and gasps of horror resonated throughout the eerily silent battlefield, disfigured and mutilated corpses of children forced to fight in a war meant for the godly beings they called parents. "What is this?" Zeus distractedly asked as he took in every small detail of the bloodied earth in front of him. Coming to a shaky stop at the center of it all, Annabeth and Percy. "So that's it. I finally finished with the first chapter, so what do you guys think? I know it's a little long, but hopefully, you guys enjoyed it. I'll try and update later tonight since I have it all typed out already. Okay, bye-bye." Healing takes time. Zeus and the rest of the Olympians could only stare in shock at the wreckage in front of them. It seemed the monsters didn't care for age as kids barely old enough to attend school lay dead, most unrecognizable. Little bodies disturbingly out of place next to the older children, and even then this whole image was wrong. No one should have died. The Olympians could only watch in utter pity as both Athena and Poseidon approached the still bodies of their favored children. Both Percy and Annabeth laid still on the blood-soaked ground, hands interlaced even in death. "Percy, Annabeth, get up, please." When no response came, no movement made, both gods made as if to touch their kids only to fall to their knees as they stifled back sobs. Poseidon's body shook violently from the force of his silent sobs, his mouth set a thin straight line, but his eyes a raging storm clashed on as if to express all of the pain and frustration that it could not speak. Eyes focused in on Percy's still form, determinedly keeping his watery eyes on his son's dead body, because it was the least he could do for him. In contrast to Poseidon, Athena was openly sobbing and pleading Annabeth to open her eyes and get up, to just breathe, but nothing happened. Athena's gray eyes could barely see with all the tears welling up as she openly screamed out in pain, because her kids were dead. Annabeth was dead. Athena had her hand reaching out to Annabeth. But she fell short as her hand dropped and came back to clutch at her chest. Unbearable pain coursed through both single parents, for they weren't feeling much like the powerful deities they were. They had failed their children once again. They all did. This was starting to become a rather painful cycle. All of the Olympians felt the same pain to some degree, for they too were parents, and as much as they would like to be as heartless as they made themselves out to be, they just couldn't go through it, for this was their kids they were talking about, their family. Zeus looked around wearily as he took in the appearances of both his brother and his daughter, the corpses of children too young, now cold and losing color, and then at his family, the rest of the powerful yet broken Olympians. Zeus sighed and waved for Apollo to come forth. "Apollo." "I know." Apollo hesitatingly walked forward, coming to a stop just behind his uncle, Poseidon, and his stepsister, Athena, both of whom were still heartbreakingly weeping for their lost children. The sun god seemed to hesitate once more before at last, he continued forward and kneeled down at Percy's side. Apollo's pleading eyes would have told Percy everything he needed to know had his eyes been open to witness such thing. But alas, the sea prince continued blissfully unaware of anything. With a trembling tanned hand, Apollo reached over Percy and kept his gaze on his oddly peaceful face, as he checked Annabeth's pulse, frowning deeply when he found none. He refused to look back at Zeus and the other Olympians until he finished checking Percy. He desperately hoped he wouldn't have to look into Poseidon's eyes and tell him that his son was gone. Hoped he wouldn't have to be the one to tell the others that they had failed the hero of Olympus once again by allowing him to die. With a heavy heart, Apollo retracted his arm and paused at Percy's tear-streaked face, sighing tiredly as he closed his eyes and leaned down to press his forehead against Percy's own, and then his hand reached out. Apollo's hand drew back like it had been burnt, and he whipped his head to lock eyes with Poseidon first, and then towards Zeus and the other Olympians who had been watching the whole ordeal with tears in their eyes, as they too had lost their own kids, and then back at Poseidon. Percy's still alive. At this everyone's heart seemed to stop before suddenly adrenaline thumped loudly in their veins, and then they were rushing in the direction of the last survivor against the war with Gaia, the last survivor of his generation, Perseus Achilles Jackson, son of Poseidon, hero of Olympus, along with many endless feats he achieved in the name of the same gods who put him through such torture. Despite the fact that Apollo was supposed to be the best one regarding medical knowledge, he couldn't stop the rush of emotions that enveloped him completely. He was alive. They came in time to save at least one of their own. Apollo didn't even realize that he was crying until drops fell onto Percy's peaceful face. Apollo quickly moved to wipe the tear away from Percy's face, and then with speed rivaling that of Hermes's, he carefully picked up Percy in his arms bridal style and locked eyes with each of the Olympians. "Stay here, I'll go back to Olympus with Poseidon and Zeus. Bury your children and of those that couldn't be here. When you're done you can come back." With a nod from Zeus, the Olympians hesitatingly backed away from the son of Poseidon. They did not wish to leave him just yet, were he to die. "I swear on the river Styx that Percy Jackson shall not die today." As if reading their thoughts, probably did, Apollo reassured them of their troubles before nodding and flashing away with two of the big three hot on his heels. "He swore, didn't he?" "Yeah, he did." With a sigh, the remaining Olympians turned back to the corpses of children they failed to save, and prepared themselves for a long day. Hestia and Hades both waited for the others to come back, as they weren't part of the main council, therefore had no right to go anywhere without permission. Although neither wanted to go anywhere near the place all of the other Olympians went to. Hades had felt each death personally and didn't want to have to face the corpses of his own children. They had fought long and hard, and if nothing else, deserved to be able to rest now that they had died so gruesomely. Hades would give all the souls who died on that battlefield a quick and easy passing. He had already personally judged them. Now they just had to be directed towards Elysium, or as for some, the Isles of the Blessed. Hestia had felt the warmth of the fire fade away till only just a spark flickered here and there, already knowing just who would have to bear the weight of this outcome. Hestia sighed wearily. Her hero never seemed to be able to get a break, and now he was going to be so lonely. So lonely. Always lonely. She just hoped that he wouldn't try and join his friends so soon after this. As Hestia was about to tell Hades to join her by the fire, from where he stood gloomily in the shadows, three blinding lights forced them both to close their eyes, and then there he was. Percy. Apollo looked torn between looking like his world had just been burnt down to the ground and like the love of his life had just accepted to marry him. It would have been amusing had it not been for the blood dripping down Percy's body. Both Hestia and Hades quickly moved from their positions in the room and rushed towards Percy, who was getting carried by Apollo and into the medical room belonging to said sun god. Is he going to live? No one asked what had happened, for it was clear to them just what had happened. Both Apollo and Zeus nodded as Poseidon was too busy keeping his eyes on his son, one whom he had thought he'd lost forever. Relief coursed through both previously unaware deities as they followed Apollo to where he quickly, but carefully placed Percy's broken body. Four powerful gods stood around awkwardly as they didn't know what they should do. Apollo was the only one moving, and he was moving quickly. "Okay. Look. I need all of you to give me as much of your energy as possible. Otherwise healing Percy, even with my help, will be impossible. Boy's just inches away from death's door, so you need to decide quickly." Everyone in question wordlessly started to send as much energy as they could, without seriously harming themselves, towards Apollo, who as soon as he felt the power coming in, directed said power into Percy. Now even if Apollo had been anything else other than Apollo, had he kept all of the power for himself, he would have died rather painfully too, as gods could only hold so much power that didn't originally belong to them. But since Apollo was indeed Apollo, he wouldn't dare keep any of this power for himself when Percy clearly needed it. It was the least he could do for the boy after having been partially at fault for the deaths of all his friends. Sweat slowly started to build up on Apollo's forehead as he strained to keep the power away from him and into Percy, making sure that said power was actually doing its job and healing him. When it was decided that it really was doing its job of healing the boy, Apollo sighed in relief before turning his head to look his uncle, Poseidon. When he finally got his attention, Apollo smiled and nodded, and to his amusement, Poseidon instantly relaxed and seemed even more determined in sending his power into his son's broken but healing body. With Poseidon's determination in mind, Apollo focused back to the task at hand. He would be damned if he didn't give it his all to save the boy, who had done so much for him and his family, while only getting repeatedly hurt in the process of keeping them satisfied. Poseidon hadn't known what to think when he had seen the body of his son laying down on the ground with the daughter of Athena in his arms, looking even worse than death itself. They had looked so breathtakingly peaceful even in death, or so he thought, and he had called out, because surely his son wasn't dead, right? He had been momentarily confused when he had gotten no answer, and then it was as if all the air was sucked right out of his chest, and he suddenly couldn't breathe. His precious son was dead, and he had failed as a father for failing to be by his side when he needed it the most. He didn't even register the cries of Athena as she wept in grief for her own child, all of her children, for he had only one, not including the others, for they weren't partially mortal. Poseidon had felt such terrible pain in his chest that he wouldn't be surprised at the fact that his heart was exploding from grief. He had wanted nothing more than to gather his son in his arms and wail for all the world to hear, but he couldn't bring himself to do such a thing as to touch his own son after having left him to fight in a war against beings incapable of permanently dying. While wanting to do nothing more than express his grief at such a tragedy, he couldn't disgrace his son like that, and so he kept quiet and bit his tongue, adamant on keeping silent and grieving in private. Expect that Apollo had been ordered by Zeus to check and see if they truly were dead, and while the daughter of Athena was dead, his son was not, and his happiness couldn't be greater at such news. Yet at hearing that his son was just about ready to head on to the underworld, he panicked because he wasn't going to let his boy die just yet. He needed forgiveness and wanted nothing more than to give everything to his son who had been broken so many times that he had to be forcefully glued back together to function at all. And so he all but rushed out after Apollo with Zeus at his side as they followed him into Olympus and then to a medical room created by Apollo for situations such as these. It was mind-numbing, the whole experience, but he was going to be fine, he knew it. And then Percy started screaming. "Okay, I give you the second chapter. I hope that you like it because whoa, things are getting interesting, aren't they? Now, I might post 2 or maybe just 1 tomorrow again because writing is my life. So that it's bye-bye." Chained at heart, all Percy wanted to do was join his friends and family in the underworld. So why was it that he felt his body healing, pain disappearing slowly but surely till nothing but a few sore spots were left? He was pretty sure who did this, and he was going to give them hell for this. I mean, seriously, can't they just leave him be? Do they really need his services that much? Gods, how frustrating. Percy was just about to open his eyes when he heard laughter. Laughter from the one being he never wanted to see again for as long as he lived, because apparently, he wasn't going to die today. "Perseus, come to me." Yeah, not happening. Except he felt his mind being forced towards said voice, and no, please, oh gods, he wasn't ready for this again. "Perseus, open your eyes." Percy, having no other choice, hesitantly opened his eyes and could only squint in the darkness before him. He instantly regretted opening his eyes, for standing right in front of him was the one being that constantly tortured him in the little sleep he managed to get. Tartarus. Percy could only watch wide-eyed in horror as Tartarus smiled darkly at him. "What a surprise, isn't it?" Tartarus mockingly asked as he moved towards Percy's paralyzed form, pale hand coming out from the shadows to trail a single finger down Percy's cheek. Body flinching back immediately at the touch, Percy slapped his hand away as he got out of his shock, moving away from Tartarus, who only looked back in amusement. "Like hell it is." Percy angrily accused Tartarus as his eyes moved quickly in search of a way out of whatever nightmare he was stuck in, finding nothing but darkness and only one enemy. Come now, Perseus. That's not a nice way to greet someone who just gifted you with their presence. It's been just a long time after all. Percy flinched back at his words. I don't care. I'd rather you never gift me with your disgusting presence. Tartarus snarled dangerously, smile falling as his eyes darkened further than the usual dark swirls they were. Watch your tongue, Perseus. I didn't bring you here for nothing. Then what did you bring me here for? Wherever this is anyway. Besides, you lost any chances of getting any respect from me after what you did, you bastard. Percy snarled back as his hand reaches for Riptide, body tense and ready to attack at a moment's notice, light on his feet as he prepared himself for what seemed like an inevitable fight against the very being the gods themselves feared. Damn it. If this is some sick joke of the gods, I swear. Where the hell am I anyway? Wasn't I just about to die? I felt myself healing though, so unless the gods healed me to just toss my body back into Tartarus, then he really had no clue as to where and why he was here with Tartarus himself. The bastard is talking nonsense anyway. What the hell would he want to talk about anyway? It would make much more sense if I was brought here for torture again, but to talk? Unbelievable, the fates really do hate him. Tartarus relaxed slightly as if going, ah yes indeed, I totally forgot about torturing you and your best friend. I guess I shouldn't have expected you to respect me, do carry on. I wish to talk of those gods of yours. What, that makes no sense, why would he want to talk about the gods? You see, I've been gathering information on them, thanks to all of those monsters you killed for me, and can you imagine my surprise to find out that they're planning to force you to accept immortality? Now, it doesn't seem so bad, but they don't wish to gift you such a thing. Oh no, they are planning to keep you chained to their side, always doing what they ask of you without complaint. Is that really what you want? No, there's no way, the gods wouldn't force that onto him, right? Oh gods, what if they did? I can't let that happen, even if this turns out to be a lie. I don't want to have to live without my family, without Annabeth. He'll just have to force them to accept his decision, that he wants no part in the lives of the gods after he wakes up. He is going to live normally till he dies and then peace, he'll get to be with his family and everything will be okay. If what you say is true, then I won't let them. I won't let them take that away from me. I'm done being their pawn. Percy had unconsciously dropped his guard and was looking confused, unnameable emotions flashing rapidly in his eyes, looking torn between believing the gods wouldn't do such a thing to looking hurt and betrayed as if he wasn't surprised that they would do this. Tartarus smiled wickedly. Yes, that's right, doubt your gods, Perseus. Doubt them and come to me. Believe in me and I shall give you what you want the most, I'll reunite you with your pathetic family. Do it. Believe in me. Do you believe me? I don't know. Frowning at Percy, Tartarus moved to cup Percy's face in his hands, forcing Percy to look him in the eyes. His hands are cold, Percy thought. Annabeth was warm, not cold. I will send you back, and you will see how right my words are. When the time comes that you believe me, call my name and I shall come to you. Do you understand? Percy looked into Tartarus's dark eyes, feeling as if he were drowning in their depth, noticing the oddly desperate look in his eyes, as if begging him to just believe and trust. Okay. Tartarus smiled, and then he thrust his hand into Percy's chest, curling dark little chains into Percy's heart, squeezing it tightly but keeping it intact. Just to be safe, of course. How else would he be able to get summoned? I'll see you soon, Perseus. Percy awoke screaming as he clutched at his chest, feeling the phantom pain as if it were just happening. He could still feel Tartarus's cold pale hand gripping his heart and sending dark little things to wrap around his pounding heart. Bastard, I shouldn't have lowered my guard. Percy's thoughts were interrupted by a cough. He snapped his head up to lock eyes with worried blue eyes. Isn't that Apollo? What happened, Percy? Percy didn't think it was such a good idea to tell the gods of his little encounter with Tartarus, his parting words still echoing inside his mind. Just a nightmare. Every one of my friends died, so it was probably about that. The present gods had the decency to look ashamed, Zeus averting his eyes from mine, while my father moved closer to me, seemingly trying to check if I was really all right. Hades was staring intently at me from what I could see through the corner of my eye. Shivers went down my spine because I could decipher what he was thinking. Sometimes he seriously reminded me of Nico. Nico, wait. No, I can't think about them. If I want to start anew, I can't keep thinking about the ones I lost. I would never forget them, of course, but I have a feeling I won't need to try anyway. Moving on to the last, but most certainly not the least, Hestia. Hestia looked so sad, not as warm either from what he could tell. She looked pale and weak. The war with Gaia must have really taken a toll on her. Not that I was any better, if anything I was probably worse. Locking eyes with Hestia's kind ones, the emotions and apologies she was trying to tell me through eye contact alone was all I needed to see to know that she was sorry she couldn't have been of more help to me and my friends. She was always so understanding. Reminds me of someone. Percy. I really need to stop getting lost in my thoughts. They won't do me any good. Percy reprimanded himself silently as he looked back up at Apollo. Sorry, what? Apollo furrowed his brows in concentration as he frowned. Can you tell us what happened back there? Apollo seemed hesitant in asking him, probably worried about something unimportant. Maybe he was in doctor mode? I killed her. Gaia, I killed her. At this Zeus snapped his head to look at me, impatiently demanding, you defeated Gaia? How? Percy was confused. What did he mean by how? With his hands, obviously. With my hands. Zeus looked constipated as he rapidly turned red. Boy, you obviously hit your... Apollo quickly cut off Zeus as he nervously sweat dropped and asked, what Zeus meant was, how exactly you killed her? Oh. Well, first, I cut off her access to the earth using water to trap her, before cutting off all the air inside said water bubble. Then I froze her swords, hands, and feet, before slowly boiling her blood. After that, I just took her heart out and smashed it repeatedly under my foot. It was fun, that part. Then I set fire to her corpse before letting her nasty brown mud remains to seep back into the earth. Well, that's it really. She didn't come back up. If anything, I felt her go even deep into the earth than before. She won't wake up again in a very, very, very long time. So you're welcome. All 5 Olympians looked amazed and were openly gaping in shock because while they knew Percy was strong, they hadn't really known how strong, and even now they were sure he hadn't even used his full power. The son of Poseidon scared them sometimes, seriously. He could probably kill them all and still not be using all of his power. They were going to have to be careful and keep him on their side, forever if possible. Whether he wanted to or not, he was going to get the gift of immortality and stay fighting for them for as long as they had enemies. Even longer then, because he was genuinely good company, and that was hard to find in a couple of centuries or so. Yes, Percy was going to be theirs for the keeping. They knowingly got a strange look on their faces as they all thought the same. A life with one of the most powerful, if not the most powerful, demigod. Being immortal was exhausting, but with someone like Percy, hell, time would fly with how amusing and interesting each day would be. They were never letting Percy leave, not if they had any say in the matter. Percy paled at the look on each of the present Olympians. Perhaps Tartarus had been right. He needed to leave, now. With his eyes on the present Olympians, he slowly crept back and was just opening the door, when he turned and bumped into a hard muscular chest. You got to be kidding me. Please don't tell me it's Ares. Percy looked up into dark fiery pits, literal flames staring back at him as he slowly backed away, noticing the other Olympians behind the one he had bumped into. Nope, not today. Turning to flee, Percy once again screeched back at the sight of his father's concerned eyes, hands coming up to touch him. Now that he was trapped between his father and Ares, not including the other Olympians, who had snapped out of their thoughts the moment Percy bumped head first into Ares's chest, he had no other choice but to forcefully push past and away from Olympus. Damn it. The fates really do hate him. Percy, son, where are you going? Percy glanced between his father and the other Olympians. He needs to get out of here and soon. I just forgot to turn off the sink, back home, so I should probably go check that out? Percy winced at the way he said that, if he didn't sound sure they were going to suspect something. "Oh, that's okay, Percy. I can go and check while you rest. You must be tried after having just defeated Gia, let us take care of it." Percy gave up trying to get away unsuspiciously as he but barreled right past his father and the others by his side, because if he tried to go past Ares and the others with him, he would have much chance. Percy was about to sigh in relief when he made it out into the council room, the Olympians shouting at him to get back here. He was still hurt and that he should just lay down and rest when all of a sudden another blinding light stopped Percy in his tracks. Percy swore. The Furies had arrived. "All right, so how is it so far? I've been trying really hard to update twice every day, but it is kind of difficult when I only have a bit of time to write in the morning and can only start writing seriously at around 7 or 8, all the way until 10 or maybe a rare 11. Well anyway, Percy is getting close to dimension hopping, so let me get back to writing. Hope you enjoy it. Bye-bye." Meeting the Senju, all three Furies stared back at Percy blankly as said person paled further and could only watch in fear as the three old ladies held up a worn blue thread, newly mixed with a single thread of black. "Your time has come, Perseus," the Furies hissed as one. Percy could only watch in horror as Alecto, stupid pre-algebra teacher, raised her scissors and was cut the string, a nasty snarl, attempting to be a smile, wide on her face. Percy's world went blank as screams faded out from his ears, the Olympians stumbling across such a terrifying scene, only moments after they had dreamed of the perfect life with Percy by their side as their hero. Zeus looked like he was panicking, although Poseidon looked like he was having a stroke. He should get that checked out. Hades looked furious, and rightfully so. Having to be torn away from your perfect ending was no little thing. With a booming shout, Zeus ordered all of the Olympians to gather their power and prepare themselves to give Percy immortality. Quickly. We mustn't let him die so soon after having just healed him. With no objections, everyone quickly gathered as much power as they could into a large sphere of light. The air hummed with raw power as static zapped here and there. All at once the Olympians raised their sphere of raw and powerful energy, disguised as light, for such power was blinding, and they hurled it towards Percy with shouts of force. The Furies did nothing except silently looking at one another, before nodding and gathering their own spheres of power. It was inevitable that this happens to the young hero. Despite his previous claims to wanting no such thing, Perseus Achilles Jackson was gifted with immortality. However, as the cut blue thread started to mend itself, and the blue and black faded to a glowing, bright golden, a big blue portal seemed to form beneath Percy, and no one had any time to stop what was about to happen next. Wait. No. The Olympians could only watch in horror as Percy slipped through their fingers and into the portal that had oddly formed beneath him. With a shout of rage, the Olympians turned to glare at the Furies and demand an explanation, but could only stop short at the missing sight of said Furies. They were gone. Just like Percy, like their children. Even the elevator security guard could hear the shout of anger and frustration, all the way down from the 600th floor. Wide blue eyes looked up at the roof as if trying to see all the way through to the top and see what was going on, before sighing and going back to his reading. Must be that demigod again. They really don't pay him enough for this, and with that, all was forgotten. Except for one war-battered demigod, newly turned immortal, who just so happened to wake up with a loud grunt of pain as he fell from the portal and down into the ground below. Seriously. I literally just got healed. Percy sighed before rolling over to lift himself up, dusting off his orange shirt and dark blue jeans, both with an uncomfortable amount of cuts and rips, basically in tatters, as well as stiff and rough from all the dry blood splattered on, previously from the war with Gia. Percy looked around confused as he tried to remember where he was. He was surrounded on all sides by a thick green forest, a peaceful feeling floating aimlessly in the air. Percy tried to look around for any hiding Olympians, because weren't they just up on Olympus? Come on, Percy, think. I was trying to escape but was blocked by a brick wall of something called Ares's chest. Then I ran outside and saw the Furies cut my own string. Man, I can't remember. Wait, the Furies. Wide-eyed, Percy whirled around trying to spot them. coming to a screeching halt at the sight of the three-winged bats watching him from above one of the many tall trees in the surrounding forest. Honestly, it was a nice change of scenery, with all the greens and trees, and sweet-smelling air. Whoa, was that a squirrel? Wait. What was I doing again? Oh yeah, stupid ADHD. Percy forced himself to focus his attention back on the three Furies who looked so amused at his inability to focus right now. Seriously, they didn't need to tease him about it. He'd already been teased enough in life, they didn't need to add to it. Hey, aren't I supposed to be dead? I shouted up at them, because I was confused and tired, and just wanted to rest after having just defeated Gia. Perseus. Alecto began. It is your duty to carry out this quest. Megara added. Change the stories of those you must save. Tisiphone continued. Whether it be by living through 1, 2, perhaps 3 generations, you must change the lives of those who cross your path. And when the time has come, we'll return to place you in another desperate world in need of a hero. Until you finish this quest, you are on your own. We carry the will of the fates as they prepare for the future. It was the only way we could have cut your life short. Do not anger them by failing to do your part. Don't let the gods catch you, we'll be watching. All three Furies hissed their parting words as they laughed darkly, shooting upwards and away from Percy who stood shocked down below the trees. Do the fates really have to torture him like this? He was literally just about to start his new normal life. But no, they just had to send him off to do things he had no clue how to do. Really wish you were here now, wise girl. You'd know exactly what to do. Oh gods, why him? Percy hated being a demigod. Oi! Who are you? Percy lifted his head from where he had been hiding it in his hands in an attempt to just disappear. Locking eyes with 2 small children, who were wearing some really weird clothes. One had his dark black hair into a funny bowl cut that looked kind of cute on him, adorable really, and the other kid was openly glaring at Percy, spiky white hair with bright ruby eyes. Man, these kids are pretty skinny, are they eating? Oh well, maybe later he could find some food to share, they looked like they really needed with how thin their arms were. Or maybe he was just being weird because he hadn't really slept at all. His mind must be playing tricks on him. Ah, sorry, I got distracted. My name's Percy Jackson, who are you? Percy watched amusingly as he saw both kids glance at each other in confusion, the kid with white hair dropping his guard slightly, probably thinking he wasn't a threat. Man, if only you knew. The kid with the bowl cut stepped forward excitedly as he pointed at himself using his thumb. My name is Hashirama Senju, nice to meet you. Percy smiled fondly at the kid, no, Hashirama, and nodded, looking expectantly at the remaining kid who seemed to blush slightly at having been stared at. Tobarama Senju. Laughing slightly at Tobarama's hesitant reply, Percy rubbed his neck nervously and timidly asked, wher do? I'm sorry, do you know where we are? I'm a little lost, you see some friends of mine left me here and I don't know where I am exactly. Both boys looked amused at his story, having completely relaxed in my presence now that they were sure I wasn't an enemy. Hashirama and Tobarama both looked at each other, nodded, and then each grabbed one of my hands before dragging me forward. Whoa! Where are we going? Trying hard to keep up with the boys, because wow, their legs can run, Percy asked as he hurried along after both Senju. We're going home, came the excited reply from a cheerful Hashirama. Percy was about to reply back because was it really such a good idea to invite a stranger to someone's house? When all of a sudden a sharp pain erupted in his head. Memories not belonging to him flooded his every senses as he lost sight of what was real and what was not. Suddenly seeing the lives of both Hashirama and Tobarama, Percy could only watch wide-eyed as both boys suddenly turned into men. In these new weird memories, because he was literally seeing them as kids right now. So why was it that he saw both kids grow and die, then get resurrected by a madman, only to die yet again, and wait, wasn't this what the Furies were talking about? Before Percy could make sense of what he saw, was still seeing, he felt himself trip and fall to the ground with a groan of pain. Ow! Hashirama laughed openly as Tobirama smirked at the pained man in front of him, neither moving to help Percy get up. Haha, sorry. It's just that we weren't even going that fast and yet you still fell. Percy sighed tiredly and waved them off. Never mind. Let's just walk, for now, you guys lead the way. Forcing his weary limbs to move so he could get up, Percy dusted his already torn and dirty clothes off once again, before grabbing Hashirama's outstretched hand, his much larger hand almost completely covering Hashirama's own tiny one. As the trio walked in peaceful silence, Hashirama hummed happily as he practically skipped forward, tugging Percy along as said person got lost in his thought again, trying to figure out what it was that he had seen just moments again. Tobirama took this opportunity to observe the strange man his brother and him had found on their way back to their home. They had gone off patrolling together since Hashirama didn't want to be bored apparently. He was lying and he couldn't figure out why he even needed to lie. Focusing back to the matters at hand, Tobirama had been struck still the moment those beautiful sea-green eyes met his own ruby ones. Dark silky-looking hair framing a handsome scarred face. Tobirama had wanted to do nothing more than to hold this beautiful strange man in his arms and never let go. Naturally mortified at his own thoughts, Tobirama had opted to glare at the man as if it were his fault that Tobirama was feeling such a way. And then there was the matter of his overall appearance. Percy, or so he said, looked like he had just been through war and then some. Dried blood was splattered all over his strange-looking clothes and from what was visible of his skin, he had plenty of scars. Tobirama also took notice of that odd-looking tattoo on Percy's forearm. Was there a purpose or, feeling frustrated that he couldn't understand the man before him, Tobirama glared at the side of Percy's stupidly handsome face. He was just too complicated, and pretty. Arg, damn that man. Percy unknowingly shivered as he looked around nervously. Was someone cursing him? Shaking his head, Percy frowned as he came to a conclusion as to why he saw what he did. The fates obviously hated him, that's why. Gods, it probably had to do with what the Furies had told him, something about living through entire generations. Wait a god's damn minute. Live through entire generations of people. Holy shizzle. The immortality thing. Oh gods. Seriously? The gods really had to do that to him? They took something valuable from me without even asking. How the Hades was he ever going to see his wise girl again? His family? Friends? Percy wanted nothing more than to lay down and cry himself to death, but he couldn't now because the Furies had told him he needed to save lives, and if he could help in any way at all, he most certainly would. At least like this, he could forget about who he was for just a moment before having to face the cruel reality. Gods, he's getting old already. Percy, we're here. Percy looked up from the ground to take in their new surroundings, a large house in front of him as a strict-looking man walked towards him with a frown on his aged face, another small kid following behind him timidly. Are you a shinobi? The aged man asked him wearily as he kept an eye out on his children who seemed to be completely relaxed in this strange man's presence, even Tobirama, which was surprising in on itself. Who was this man? Percy furrowed his brows in confusion. Shinobi. All right. I finally finished another one. What do you think? Percy has finally been introduced to the shinobi world. Soon he'll meet a certain broody Uchiha and his family, so let's wait for that exciting part. It's a little hard for me to write about these characters because they're from a completely different timeline than Percy's modern world, so please don't hate too much on any mistakes I make. Okay, that's it, I'll get to writing the next one. Bye-bye. Unexpected Uchiha. I'm sorry, what now? Percy asked the supposed father of Tobirama, Hashirama, and maybe the other kid hiding behind the man? Percy was super confused. He literally went from fighting Gia, to dying slowly, to being saved, to being killed by Tartarus, to running from the Olympians, to actually dying this time, to getting revived and gaining immortality, to suddenly being in another dimension and being tasked to save entire worlds. And now he was being asked if he was a shinobi. I mean, what even is that? He was sure he heard it multiple times in those weird memories he saw, but he couldn't remember what it was. He was sure that they were important though, these shinobi people. Before the man could respond, however, Hashirama seemed to sense Percy's agitation and tightened his grip on his hand, which he hadn't let go of since he grabbed it, because Percy was so warm and comforting even though they had just met minutes ago. Percy was nice. He looked really pretty for a guy too, even more so than any of the other girls and guys back home. He smelled like the sea as well as something else that just seemed to relax Hashirama further. He had seen his brother react to the man in just about the same manner as he did himself. So since the man had let them both feel peace since the death of their brother, Kawurama Senju, Hashirama decided to take it upon himself to make this man feel as relaxed and safe in their presence as they were in his. And so he smiled up brightly at him and said, "What Oto-san meant was, are you a ninja? You seem to move and look like one, so are you?" Hashirama could barely keep his concern from showing onto his face when Percy's face went blank, completely emotionless, nothing except for the tiny twitches his eyes and hands were doing. And with that same emotionless face, Percy replied saying, "Yes, I am, why wouldn't I be?" Hashirama shared a look with Tobirama because surely something was wrong. They both glanced towards their father to see him frowning deeply, eyes narrowed dangerously. Percy on the other hand was this close to snapping. Ninjas, he was in a world full of ninjas, shinobi they said. The fates better hope he's calmed down by the time he finished dealing with the Furies because he was done playing these games. Calm down Percy, kids are watching. Yeah, okay. Snapping out of it, Percy refocused his attention back to the man that Tobirama and Hashirama had led him to. Forcing a smile, Percy's own eyes narrowed, which caused the man in front of him to flinch back, something that neither of his children missed. Why was their father scared? Percy would never hurt them. They had seen for themselves that he wasn't dangerous at all, at least not to them. "I'm afraid I didn't get your name." "You are." The dark-haired man seemed to snap out of whatever trance he was in and coughed into his fist as he apologized. "Excuse my insolence. I am the father of the two children beside you, as well as the one behind me, but Suma Senju at your service, and you are." It was Percy's turn to blush as he rubbed the back of his neck nervously, reflexively tightening his grip on Hashirama's hand as he genuinely smiled this time. That mischievous crooked smile of his that made people relax naturally at the sight of it. It seemed to do the trick as everyone in the clearing suddenly relaxed and released the tension in their shoulders. The two newcomers intently listening to the mysterious man introduced himself. "Sorry about that, my name's Percy Jackson. Your kids here actually found me by the trail, outside the forest, or at least I think so. My friends left me here, and since I don't necessarily know where here is, I was wondering if maybe you could help me out a bit." But Suma nodded before Percy could even finish his explanation. "Of course, may I ask what clan you're from?" At this Percy nervously shifted and said, "I don't have a clan. My friends and I were just traveling around trying to find a village to belong to, but we just couldn't find the right one, and then we got into this argument and they left me here. I was hurt, as you can see by my clothes, and they had traveled here while I was unconscious, so I don't really know where I am. Your sons helped me out though, they're pretty good kids. Well, that's all. I don't really have much else to say." Both Hashirama and Tobirama had blushed at his praise and had puffed up their chest in pride as their other sibling watched on in envy. Their father rarely praised them after what happened with Kawurama, and even then their father barely acknowledged their feats. So this praise was new to them and quite welcomed coming from Percy. Despite not really knowing the man, both boys felt happier than they've ever been at hearing such praise directed at them. Whoever this man was, he was clearly important and most definitely special. Percy on the other hand was thankful for the memories he saw, because otherwise, he wouldn't have known what Suma was talking about, and now that he thought about it, Percy felt stronger and even more powerful. What scared him though was that somewhere in his mind, he knew that if he touched someone new, he would see their memories too, and while it helped him in the long run, he could feel everything they felt, and frankly there was a lot of pain, especially during this time. Gods, the fates couldn't have put him somewhere easier to handle, like maybe a place where kids had powers and studied to be heroes or something. How exhausting. But Suma examined the man in front of him, supposedly claiming to be a shinobi despite not having known what the word meant, and deemed this Percy to be telling the truth, or at least from what he could tell. The man was strange, but then again almost all shinobi were. If anything, this man might be one of the most normal ones he'd ever seen in his life. Well, I would be happy to house you for as long as you need, is that okay with you? Observing the man in front of him, Bitsuma watched the man smile in gratitude as he bowed his head slightly. I would definitely appreciate that. Thank you, Bitsuma-san. Hiding his amusement at the man's obvious discomfort at having to add honorifics, Bitsuma nudged his other son forward, nodding at him to introduce himself. Percy was still getting a hang on this honorifics thing these people used, his only knowledge of them being the memories of both boys that had discovered him. So he was grateful for having to think more on the matter when another small boy approached him slightly from behind his father as he introduced himself. Hello, my name's Itama Senju, nice to meet you. Percy smiled down at the two-toned haired colored kid as he shyly introduced himself, watching as he softly fiddled with the sleeves of his light-colored robe. Deciding to help the kid out, he had been shy once too. It was never easy having to introduce yourself to an intimidating stranger, especially one that would be staying with him under the same roof. Letting go of Hashirama's hand, something that was immediately frowned upon by said boy, Percy crouched in front of Itama and softly ruffled his hair, which was interesting because he didn't think he'd ever seen natural hair like that, one side white as Tobarama's own and the other black like Hashirama's. It's a pleasure to meet you, Itama. I hope we can get along, seeing as I'll be staying with you for a while, thanks to your father's generosity. Itama felt his heart rapidly beating at the sight of this mysterious man's face so close to his own, face heating up as intense sea-green eyes stared back at his own dark eyes. He was so handsome and kind-looking, although his eyes held such sadness, such loneliness that Itama wanted to cry. This man must have suffered a much greater deal than what Itama and his family had when they lost part of their family, Kawurama Senju, his big brother. As Itama was lost in his thoughts, he failed to see both of his older brothers unconsciously glaring at him with jealousy and hurt in their eyes. Percy hadn't been like that with them. It wasn't fair that Itama got all of the man's attention when they had been the ones to find him. HMPH. Itama finally gathered himself before saying, I hope we get along too, Percy-san. Gods, he was going to have to get used to that. Percy smiled back regardless. Bitsuma had been watching the interaction with attentive eyes and he was pleasantly surprised at how easy this strange man was getting his sons to show their emotions, to look at him with such adoration and respect despite having just met him. He himself had to admit that there was just something about the man that made you want to trust him, to confide in him and believe he would carry out your every wish, your every belief without fail. Percy Jackson was certainly an interesting man. He would be a valuable asset to his clan. Well then, time to get moving. Now that we've all introduced ourselves, I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask my sons to get back to their duties. It's getting dark and I'm sure you would like to rest, right Percy-san? Percy smiled gratefully at the aged man but said smile dimmed a bit when he realized that he wouldn't get any sleep unless he scouted the area first. Actually, would you mind if I took a quick walk around? I don't think I can sleep without checking my surroundings first. Expecting a negative reaction to his words, Percy was surprised at how the man simply nodded as if knowing what it was like to be unable to sleep on unfamiliar grounds. Perhaps headed no, after all, it seemed like Bitsuma was also a shinobi from what he could tell through the memories he had seen. Interesting, and greatly appreciated, thank you. Short and simple, but radiating with gratitude. Lifting from his crouch in front of Itama, Percy walked towards the surrounding forest, walking backward as he waved goodbye to the suddenly pouty children, who eventually waved back with shouts to come back soon. Giving them one last smile, Percy turned and disappeared into the forest for a quick examination of his surroundings. His temporary home. The kids he left behind him sighed sadly, before trudging off to finish their work, giving one last longing look into the forest before they'd disappeared. Bitsuma sighed. Percy would have to get back soon unless he wanted 3 children hunting him down. He prayed to Kami that it wouldn't come to that. He didn't want to have to restrain his own kids. How tiring. And with that cheerful thought, Bitsuma follows his children inside their home to watch over their progress. Percy sighed as he finally finished scouting out the large area and was about to head back and get some sleep in, when he heard a loud splash followed by an angry shout of frustration. Raising a brow in confusion, Percy looked around before following the sound. As Percy walked by the endless rows of trees, he finally came out of the leafy maze and his eyes came across a large clear river, acting as a border to the other side of the forest. Percy froze as he locked eyes with an angry yet surprised little boy. No one moved for a single tense moment before the kid on the other side of the river asked him, "Who the hell are you?" Percy's lips twitched up. This kid was just like a certain moody demigod. "Percy Jackson. And you?" The black-eyed boy with dark shoulder-length hair frowned and narrowed his eyes at him, before cocking his hips to the side and crossing his arms over his chest. "Madara Uchiha. Okay, that's it. Now we're getting somewhere. Anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know that I'm going to have to post only one chapter every day now since school is starting again tomorrow for me. Well, hope you like this chapter. Back to writing for me. Bye-bye." Agreement with a moody duck, Percy walked forward as he smiled at Madara, the pale kid watching him from across the river. Dark ebony eyes watching his every move as he got closer to the edge of the river. "Madara, right? Well, I heard your shout from all the way over there, you okay?" Smirking at the sight of Madara's slowly heating face, the boy's eyes wide and alarmed at the fact that he had let his emotions get the better of him, Percy sat down on the rocky surface and put his hands in the water. Instant relief surged through him as Percy felt his few sore spots healing. The tired feeling he was experiencing faded as the water filled him with humming energy. HMPH. As if I would want to talk to someone like you. If anything, Madara wanted to talk with the newcomer, but he couldn't back down now. Disappointment flooded his senses as he turned to leave the clearing. Keep me company for a while. Percy wasn't new to dealing with these types of brats, having had a few in his family, and well, he had to admit, he kind of missed having friends like this. Madara peeked back at the man from out of the corner of his eye. Just this once he would indulge the man, and only because he wanted him to stay, not because Madara wanted to, of course. Fine. Percy smiled sadly as he watched Madara sit across from him on the other side of the river, eyes fondly taking in every detail of the kid as if it were the last time they'd ever meet. Both males sat in comfortable silence as Percy stared into the water as he once again got lost in his thoughts. He's been doing that a lot lately. Madara, on the other hand, observed the strange creature sitting several feet away from him, a river separating the two of them as the water gently flowed. Percy Jackson was a strange name for someone to have. Madara had never heard of the name before, and it only served to further his interest in the man. He wore strange tattered clothes. Percy hadn't bothered changing yet, and from what he could see this far away, had a variety of scars all over his body. Madara would be lying if he said he wasn't scared of the man in front of him. There was just something about Percy that screamed power and strength, something that had your senses screaming at you to run away because they were about to die. However, Percy's nature seemed to contradict these warnings. It made Madara relax and ignore his senses telling him that the man in front of him was dangerous and could very possibly kill him. And so he stayed and watched. It was oddly peaceful, and so he startled both Percy and himself when he unconsciously blurted out, "My friend got mad at me." Percy had flinched at the sudden outburst, but calmed down when he realized it was just Madara. Said person winced at the fact that he had disturbed Percy with his problems when the man was clearly just trying to relax. "Sorry, I didn't mean to, it's fine." Percy interrupted Madara as he tried to apologize. Instead of getting annoyed at him as Madara had expected, he flushed at the sight of intense, lazy, half-lidded eyes staring back at him, a small smirk on Percy's scarred face. How the man managed to be so handsome with scars all over his face, Madara would never know. "What you'd do?" Percy asked as he went back to gazing at the water, much more energized than when he had been rudely awoken by the Furies. Madara looked away from Percy so quickly, he was surprised he didn't get whiplash, cheeks burning embarrassingly hot. "Nothin', hey. Why the hell are you assuming I did anything?" Face now red with anger, Madara glared darkly at the laughing man in front of him but looked away when all he got was a questioning raised eyebrow. Damn that man for being right. So. Madara sighed but nodded anyway. I insulted his family. Percy winced and nodded in understanding. Ouch, you're done for, kid. Don't worry, I'll pray for you. Madara found himself relaxing again as he playfully glared at Percy, the man's eyes twinkling as he continued to tease him. Well, did you apologize at least? Percy finally decided to be serious as he had seen how Madara's and Hashirama's friendship turned out like. It wasn't pretty, and if he could change it, he would start here and now while they were still young. Madara frowned slightly, shaking his head as he refused to look at the man in front of him. Frowning himself, Percy got up and walked towards Madara, walking across the low river and yet managing to remain completely dry. Madara didn't look up as angry tears welled up in his eyes, but he refused to cry over something as petty as getting into a fight with a friend. It wasn't like it was the first time they had insulted each other and their families, but he guessed it wasn't the right time now that Hashirama's brother had recently died. Madara shuddered as he thought about losing his own brother, Izuna Uchiha. He had already lost 3 and he didn't want to think about a world without his last remaining sibling, without his little brother. If Izuna died, Madara would probably go insane, mad with rage as insanity overtook his mind. Before Madara could dwell further on the subject though, he yelled in shock at the feeling of a hand under his chin, forcing him to look up and into the swirling sea-green eyes of the man in front of him. You wanted to, didn't you? Unable to look away, Madara stared into Percy's eyes, feeling as if hypnotized with how his body relaxed and his mind seemed unable to form any coherent thoughts. Nodding to show his response, Madara could only watch as Percy leaned forward and closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against Madara's as he softly said, "It's okay, Madara, he'll forgive you." Madara felt his own eyes closing against his will as Percy continued to reassure him, "Tomorrow when you come here again, Hashirama will be here." And as if recalling Tartarus's words, Percy smiled gently and asked, "Believe in me?" Having no other logical response, Madara nodded as a single tear droplet managed to escape from his closed eyelids, trailing down his cheek as he leapt forward into Percy's arms, surprising the man as he nearly lost his balance at the unexpected weight. Never once questioning how the man knew of Hashirama, Madara could not even comprehend why he was even crying as he sobbed into Percy's shoulder. It was as if all his pain, all his sorrow, had escaped from deep within his heart, his soul, and was only now being released into the world for all to see as he clutched tightly at the man in front of him. World blurry, Madara shut his eyes and hid his face into Percy's neck, the man having gotten over his initial shock and was now rubbing gentle circles onto his small back. His father would never comfort him like this, Madara thought as he tugged the man closer to him. Percy was his rock at the moment and he was going to stay grounded to him for as long as he could. Percy sighed inaudibly as he buried his face into Madara's long black hair. Despite looking like it could impale someone with how sharp it looked, Percy couldn't help but wonder at how his hair had gotten so soft and silky. The Aphrodite kids would have gushed over this, but they wouldn't now that they were gone. Just like everyone else. His family. Dead. All of them. Percy didn't even realize that he was crying until Madara clutched at him harder and pressed his small body even closer to Percy's own battered own, both of them shaking from the force of their sobs as they cried into each other's arms. If anyone were to walk into the clearing, they would see 2 people clearly grieving, letting out all of their bottled-up emotions that had accumulated over the long, painful years. It was enough to make anyone cry, hearing these 2 boys cry out their pain because while everyone thought and recognized Percy as a man, he was still just a kid. He was still a little boy who wanted nothing more than to be wrapped up in his mother's arms, but he couldn't because she was dead and he was expected to lead entire armies and save people when it was clear that he needed saving. Just that no one would. And so Percy Jackson was forced to be the hero again. Forced to carry the burdens of others as they only watched and criticized him for not doing better, even when he was doing their work for them. The fates could never give him a break, it seemed. As both boys finally tired out and Madara fell asleep on Percy's lap, head in between the crook of his neck, arms loosely wrapped around his shoulders as they circled his neck limply. Percy just about to follow him when he realized that he couldn't because he needed to go back, and he assumed that Madara was supposed to be patrolling the area as he recalled the memories of Hashirama. Percy sighed. He'll have to wake him up in a bit if they both wanted to remain undetected. Percy moved Madara slightly so he could comfortably sleep, even if it was a little awkward for Percy as he had to hold that position, so Madara wouldn't fall over to the side and smack his head on one of the rocks. Instead of waking Madara, Percy simply let himself fall back as he held Madara close to his chest, having noticed the small shivers that racked his body. Groaning slightly as the tension left his body, finally being able to relax as he lay down on the ground, Madara sleeping peacefully on Percy's chest. Looking up at the darkening sky, Percy thought about what Tartarus said back then during that strange nightmare of his. He'd been right about the gods. They only wanted to use him. Tartarus had told him the truth. Perhaps he should believe in him. With a thoughtful look on his face, Percy slowly reached the area above his heart, having moved Madara to the side a bit to reach it, and he was just about to touch his chest and think about summoning Tartarus when all of a sudden he heard a branch break in the distance. Percy's hand flew back from where it had been about to touch his chest, face flushing red as if caught doing something he shouldn't have. "Madara, wake up," Percy whispered as he gently shook Madara's shoulders, the pale boy groaning sleepily as he tried to snuggle back into Percy's warm chest. "Someone's coming. We literally have seconds before they come here. Get up." At this, Madara's eyes shot open and he threw himself back, away from Percy as if violently shocked. Alarm and panic flashed in Madara's eyes as his mind tried to figure out what the hell was going on, still groggy from the deep sleep he'd been in, which in fact was the best sleep he'd ever have in a long time, and he had Percy to thank for that, but right now he had to leave before someone caught them, or worse, his father had come to find him. Percy took one look at Madara to know he had to take one for the team. "Go. I'll take care of it. It's just Hashirama and Tobirama from the chakra signatures I'm getting." Madara shot a grateful look at Percy before heading towards the cover of trees, looking back just as he was about to enter. "I'll see you again, right?" Percy smiled at the worry and insecurity written all over Madara's face. This Madara was a stark contrast to the madman he'd become in the future. "Of course." With that, relief surged into Madara's face, before he flashed Percy the signature Uchiha smirk, laughing softly as he yelled over his shoulder, already running into the trees at top speed. "Let's see how you get out of that." Percy laughed at the retreating figure of the Uchiha heir. He was already changing things by the looks of it. That was good. "Percy. Percy." Percy turned back from the forest and saw both Hashirama and Tobirama looking at him with concern and an underlying hint of panic. "What's wrong with them?" "Yes. Why are you over there? We came to check if you were all right. You were taking a long time and we thought something bad had happened to you, so we came to check. Are you okay?" Percy looked down and saw that he indeed was on the other side of the river, having crossed to this side to comfort Madara. "I'm okay. Just a little agreement with a certain moody duck. Let's go back, I'm tired." Percy laughed as he got confused looks from both boys, imagining a certain Uchiha kicking him for the insult. Letting the worried boys grab one of his hands each, they headed off into the opposite direction that Madara had gone in. It was time to go home. "Oof. I finally finished, so what you think? It might seem a bit OC on my part, but they're kids right now and you know how moody kids are, not to say that adults are not, but you get what I mean. Anyway, we got to see a little bit of jealousy over here, so yay for that." Percy is oblivious to it all though, like always. "Well, I'm off to write another chapter. Bye-bye." Planned encounter with Inara. Percy sighed as he recalled the events of last night. The boys hadn't even let him sleep for another couple of hours until they had calmed down, and no, he wasn't about to leave, so if you could kindly let go. He had just wanted to sleep, and he did, but not until all three boys had him suffocating under the thick warm blankets with all of them laying down at his sides. But Tsuma had done nothing to help Percy out. The aged man had left Percy to his fate as he closed the door to the guest room, leaving Percy with Tobirama clinging onto his left side, Hashirama and Itama glued to his right. He'd hardly been able to move but slept like the dead. Percy, however, was nearly scared to death when he'd opened his eyes to see 3 sets of eyes staring back at him. 3 separate hands all touching and probing at different parts of his face. Had he not been used to this, courtesy of the stalls and their pranks, Percy was sure he would have screamed. Instead, he closed his eyes, breathed deeply before opening his eyes and smiling. "Good morning." He had gotten 2 cheerful replies and 1 stoic nod of acknowledgement. You can guess which did which. Breakfast was another matter in on itself. Pure havoc. Total chaos. Percy was surprised he had lived through the morning. After being nearly scared to death, Percy had the self-appointed job of cooking breakfast, the 3 Senju brothers helping Percy around the large kitchen as they gathered all the ingredients Percy requested. As Percy cooked some of the favorites of the Senju family, Butsuma should be waking up soon with all the noise Hashirama and Itama were making. Tobirama silent but content at Percy's side. Percy had touched Itama accidentally as he passed by him and Hashirama arguing over who should help Percy next. Percy had nearly dropped the bowl in his hands as his eyes glazed over, foreign memories once again flashing through his head as he vaguely heard Tobirama ask if he was okay, having stopped abruptly. Shaking off the sudden rush of feelings, Percy turned to stare wide-eyed at Itama, fear and pain still fresh in his mind from when Percy experienced Itama's cruel death at the hands of the rogue Uchihas. He had no idea why he was just barely experiencing these memories when he had touched Itama briefly yesterday, but one thing was for sure, he wasn't going to let Itama die this time around. Itama. Itama had stood at attention nervously, back rigidly straight as he trembled under Percy's unblinking stare. Why yes? Expecting Percy to get mad at him for having done something unacceptable, instead, Itama watched confused as Percy simply motioned him to come closer. Come help me mix this stuff. Tobirama can help Hashirama wash the vegetables. And with that, the spell was broken and Itama forced himself to calm down as he went to help Percy, feeling the intense stares from both of his brothers burning holes into his back. Tobirama glared down at his hands as he waited for Hashirama to finish washing the plump tomatoes he had previously handed him. Why was Itama getting all the attention? He wanted to help Percy too. And maybe get his attention too. Hashirama, on the other hand, was furious and confusingly so, grumbling under his breath as he violently washed the tomatoes Tobirama had handed him. Damn his brother for being luckier than him, if he could only whole. Hashirama's thoughts abruptly ended as the tomato he'd been gripping too tightly caved under the strength of his fingers and shot its contents all over his shocked face. Spluttering in embarrassment, Hashirama dropped the remains of the exploded tomato as he hurried to wipe his red face. Ears burning brightly as he heard Itama laugh and could practically feel Tobirama's smirk in his direction as he laughed behind his hand. However, everything came to a stop as a beautiful and entrancing sound filled the air. Hashirama had slowly raised his head from where it had been buried in a clean spare towel, and could only gape in shock as Percy laughed more openly and genuinely than ever before in their presence. Percy had his eyes closed from the force of his laughter as the sound continued to fill the air, hand up in the air as it hovered by his mouth as if trying to cover his wide bright smile. Mouth opening in laughter as he continued to smile happily, dark lashes becoming wet as Percy failed to stop his laughter. And when Percy finally managed to stop laughing, he opened his gleeful bright eyes to the sight of 3 bright red kids staring back at him. Tobirama had his mouth dropped in shock, having never in his life heard such a majestic and touching sound, cheeks slightly flushed and warm. Itama was bright red and had his hands up to his face, trying his best to hide his embarrassment as Percy's laughter played endlessly in his mind. It was just so beautiful. Hashirama, however, was full on firetruck red as his hands trembled and twitched as if struggling to stop himself from doing something. Percy smiled widely as the rush of happiness from before stayed with him a bit longer, laughing again briefly as Butsuma entered the kitchen bleary-eyed and confused, taking in the red faces of his 3 remaining sons. Butsuma raised a brow in question as he looked to Percy for answers, receiving only a small smile and a shake of his head before he turned to address the kids. Well, as fun as this was, Go wait with your father outside as I finish things over here. No one argued with Percy as they slowly filed out the room, glancing back one last time to see Percy in his dark blue apron, already going back to finish the food he had been preparing. And that was how they ended up waiting, the Senju brothers restlessly glancing in the direction of the kitchen as they sat on the floor. But Suma had left the room at Percy's command as he was hardly of any use in the kitchen, and by the smell that was wafting over into the dining room, there was no need to help Percy. The intriguing man clearly had everything under control. Mouths instantly watering at both the smell and sight of the food Percy brought in, had the man smiling in amusement as he placed down all of the food onto the small table close to the ground. Going back quickly for the rest of the food he managed to make without burning everything to a crisp, Percy heard everyone already moving to fill their bowls and plates with food as they grumbled about who got what. Percy grinned. It's been so long since I had the chance to eat peacefully with family. Family. Yeah, that sounds nice. Humming happily, Percy joined the waiting family as he sat down in between Hashirama and Tobirama, deciding to indulge them as he hadn't missed the envious looks they were giving Itama when he had told him to come help him out. Both boys instantly relaxed from their tense positions as Itama decided to play fair and let them have their chance to be with the mysterious man. Instantly digging into the food once Percy had settled down and piled his plate with food, giving thanks for the food before they basically inhaled all of the food Percy had made. But Suma eating at a slightly slower pace, although not by much, seeing as this was probably the best food he'd ever tasted in his life. Late wife never once coming close to cooking as good as Percy did this morning. So, Percy, I was wondering if you could accompany me to a meeting with the Nara's head. I'm sure he would be interested in meeting an enigma such as yourself. Percy frowned slightly as he stopped eating to think about it. Well, I mean, it's not like I have much else to do, right? So unless I want to be stuck between whatever war these brothers have going on between them, I might as well go ahead and meet with this Nara guy. They're supposed to be pretty lazy and laid back from the memories I saw. Things shouldn't be too hard to handle then. Nodding to himself, Percy cleared his throat and said, yeah, sure. I don't mind. When are we leaving? At this, the three other occupants looked up from where they had been busy stuffing their faces with food and stared at their father as he nervously scratched his cheek. I'm afraid we'll have to go as soon as we're done eating breakfast. Instantly Percy was left looking at a tower of food as Itama and Hashirama whistled innocently and Tobirama just smirked confidently at him. Percy sighed. He'd better start eating then. When the boys had no more food to place into Percy's plate, but Suma helped Percy get to his feet as he groaned in pain. His stomach felt like it was bulging. They were so cruel to him. Curse the fates for making him do this. And with that, but Suma left Tobirama in charge of the house until they came back, seeing as Hashirama would get too distracted with something. With an angry shout from Hashirama at the insult, both men set out to meet the Nara head at the agreed location. Percy waved back at the three smiling boys, all to different degrees, as he led, but Suma led him by the elbow. See you later. Don't burn the house. Percy laughed at the spluttering faces of all three Senju as they yelled at him inaudibly. Gods, they were fun to tease. But Suma let go of Percy's elbow by the time he had straightened and focused on the path ahead of him. So, what exactly are we gonna do? Seeing but Suma smiled out of the corner of his eye, he turned slightly to look at him and frowned when all he received was a shake of his head, indicating that he wasn't going to get any answers until they got there. Seriously? Damn, he was hoping to get some answers today. Oh well, he'll have to see when the time came. Hopefully, he didn't attract any unnecessary attention from the Nara head and his companions. He'd hate having to deal with them, especially since they were supposed to be really smart and attentive to their surroundings. Percy sighed. This was going to be a long day. As both men walked in comfortable silence, Percy closed his eyes and hid his hands in the sleeves of his robe thingy. But Suma had lent him some of his clothes, or at least until they managed to get some new ones for him. So now, instead of his old tattered wear, Percy sported a thin dark blue kimono as Batsuma wore a simple black one. Percy discovered earlier on that he didn't need to have his eyes open to see where he was going, For some reason he could now sense any living creature within a radius of entire countries, and if he wanted to even further. Must be one of the perks of having been blessed with the power of all the Olympians and the three Furies. Not even including his own personal power. Gods, his friends are probably laughing at his poor luck right now somewhere in Elysium. A faint smile hovered over Percy's face as he took the time to remember happier times, tensing when he felt the chakra signature of someone coming closer. Even without that new power of his, he could feel the air around the individual move unnaturally as he got closer to the pair. Hopefully, this was the Nara they were supposed to meet with, otherwise. But Suma, I thought we were meeting alone? Percy opened his eyes to face a man shockingly similar to that of a boy he saw in the future. Shikamaru Naru, I think it was. Must be related. Shusuke Nara. Who are you? Yes, I finally finished. Okay, well, I might have done a bunch of mistakes since I don't really know what's going on with the clothes. I researched a bit but was like, is it really what they would wear during this period? But anyway, I'll correct myself later. Back to writing it is. Hope you enjoyed it. If you have any suggestions or feedback, I'd be happy to read it. Okay then, bye-bye. A shinobi village, you say? Percy scratched his cheek nervously as he looked at Shusuke, Percy Jackson. But Suma also didn't warn me about this meeting till just moments again. Sorry if my presence bothers you. Do you want me to leave? Shusuke shook his head slowly, all the while keeping his sharp eyes trained on Percy. No, it's fine. Quite troublesome, but fine. But Suma smiled as he watched the two men converse amongst themselves quietly as they walked towards the large building in front of them. If only his sons could forget about him this easily instead of yapping his old ears off. Shusuke continued asking casual questions as he watched each and every one of Percy's reactions. The man had captured his attention after Shusuke had felt the tremendous and quite terrifying power the man was unconsciously excluding from miles away as it was. And when he had felt Batsuma's embarrassingly small chakra signature compared to the monstrous power his companion was emitting, he had all but felt his heart skip a beat as he hurried to meet both males. He had been expecting the worst. Never would he have imagined that a young but scarred male was walking peacefully alongside Batsuma as the latter caught sight of him and smiled in greeting. Not once did the man open his eyes, and yet he had tensed the closer Shusuke had come. He must have extraordinary sensing abilities if he had felt him from that far. After all, Shusuke had been but a tiny dot in the distance when Batsuma had seen him, war-trained eyes catching sight of him. Immediately, he was wary of the man, and yet the longer he spent in his presence, he felt himself slowly relaxing, and he knew instantly that the man beside him was dangerous, impossibly dangerous. If he could get two clan heads to be so relaxed around him so soon after having just met, then this man would either be an irreplaceable asset to the shinobi village Batsuma and he had been talking about creating. But if he turned out to be an enemy, he'd be the end of them all. Shusuke wished he'd never have to see the day where this young man became an enemy. And yet Shusuke knew he wouldn't have to worry as he saw the man laugh at something he said. No sane enemy would laugh so freely, so genuinely in front of another possible enemy. He wouldn't mind playing a game of shogi with this man. Looks like we're finally here, how troublesome. Shusuke sighed tiredly as he grabbed a cigarette out of nowhere, lighting it with a bit of fire from his fingertip. It might not be his personal affinity, but it was one of the few he had managed to master. It was troublesome but worth it during battle. As the trio of men walked into the large building two of the members had agreed to meet at, Percy stared in wonder at the architecture of the complex building. Annabeth would have liked to see this. Instantly Percy's happy mood plummeted to Tartarus as his expression soured. This is no time to be thinking about ghosts. He had to focus. Where are we? Shusuke frowned and looked at Batsuma for answers as he blew a large puff of smoke out from his mouth. Batsuma ignored the urge to shrug as he stared back at the Nara. There was no way in hell he would admit that he had given the younger male no information as to where exactly they were meeting the Nara's leader. The Nara sighed as if he knew exactly what Batsuma was thinking. Batsuma wouldn't put it past him if the Naras had suddenly gained the ability to read minds overnight. We're at the Nara compounds, my home. Percy looked shocked and flipped his head around to stare at him. Are you serious? Are you sure you're okay with us talking here? Sally had done a great job of teaching Percy manners, and he sure as hell wouldn't start going back on her ways now. Grinning with the burning cigarette in his mouth, Shusuke nodded as he amusedly watched Percy relax. How he thought this man could be a possible enemy, he had no idea, and he was a Nara. But Suma, why don't you wait for us in the usual room? I'll have someone bring tea in just a bit. I need to check something. Percy, come with me. But Suma did nothing other than nod and watch curiously as Shusuke led Percy outside the building from the other side, opposite from where they had entered. Percy, on the other hand, was a mix between intrigued and confused as he followed Shusuke outside again. Wait a second. Don't tell me this guy was going to murder him? Oh gods. Maybe this was a good time to run. Before Percy had the opportunity to do anything, Shusuke laid a hand down onto his shoulder, keeping him in place as he pointed to the forest silently. Percy flinched and followed his finger, looking closely at the eerily silent forest, shaded darkly by the tall trees as the wind froze and nothing moved. Waiting for a few tense seconds, Percy frowned and opened his mouth to speak, only to close it again in shock as a loud sudden rustle of leaves echoed throughout the leafy maze of trees. Sea-green eyes widened in shock as a majestic caramel-brown deer walked out into the open, stilling once it caught sight of both men. Eyes flickering quickly between Shusuke and Percy, the deer decided to focus its unblinking eyes on Percy's tense form. Shusuke watched with interest as the deer looked back at the forest and again to Percy, heart stopping as the deer walked forward slowly. Staying rigidly still, Percy froze as the deer lightly nudged his hand with its wet nose. Percy raised a shaky hand and paused briefly as the deer made to move back, before finally placing his hand down on the deer's soft, smooth fur, rubbing his snout softly as if afraid to cause damage. Never in his life had Shusuke seen a deer from the Nara forest welcome a complete stranger that wasn't, well, a Nara. This man was just surprise after surprise. How troublesome. He likes you. Both the deer and Percy startled at the sudden noise, the deer looking at Percy one more time before heading off into the forest again, Percy staring at its retreating back sadly as his hand stayed in the air. Ah, my bad. Percy sighed and lowered his hand. It's fine. We should be heading back now anyway. Yeah, you're right. Strangely disappointed, Shusuke felt terrible at having disrupted Percy's time with the deer, both having looked comfortable and relaxed in each other's presence. But he had to ruin it. Man, this guy was so troublesome. Shusuke had never thought so much in his life as he had in this man's company, as he was still doing. He was going to get gray hair at this rate. Percy sulked slightly as he and Shusuke headed back inside, Shusuke having said that he didn't need to check anymore, whatever that meant. We had a connection. Me and that deer. It looked at me as if saying, I got you, fool. I know what's going on with you. We were having a deep conversation. Why'd you ruin it, Shusuke? Gods, why'd the fates hate him so much? You guys took a while. Both males sighed once again as they entered the building and into the room, but Suma was waiting in. Just took Percy to see the deer out back. But Suma's eyes widened as that could only mean one thing. Shusuke had taken Percy to the deer to get judged, for the deer had the uncanny ability to recognize ally from foe, and if Shusuke took Percy out into the private forest, the deer let Percy touch him. Nearly choking on the tea, but Suma had been sipping to calm his nerves. The pale man looked between Percy and Shusuke in shock as he coughed harshly into his fist. If the deer had let Percy touch them, that meant that Percy didn't have any ulterior motive for having come across his sons and into his home. That was a relief. If you can convince the Uchihas of joining, I will talk to my clan about joining as well. But Suma almost bowed to Percy in gratitude for whatever it was that he had told or shown Shusuke, convincing him of joining the first Shinobi village had been hard for Suma, but if Percy could do it in the short amount of time he had spent with the Nara, convincing the other clans would be easy. Uchiha? Are you talking about Madara Uchiha and his clan? Both men turned to look at Percy in surprise. This man knew of the Uchiha clan and its heir personally? But Suma instantly narrowed his eyes. The man he had let into his home, had let his sons talk to, had just confessed to having ties with the Uchihas, his clan's most hated enemy. How do you know the Uchihas, Percy? Not noticing the odd looks he was getting, Percy continued. I met Madara near the river when I went out to scout the area. He's the only one I've met so far though. The tension left both older men's shoulders. It was fine then. Percy had only met one Uchiha, and even though the Uchiha he had met was important, he had very little time to form close bonds with the Uchiha heir. Besides, both men had seen enough liars both inside and outside of their clans, to know that Percy wasn't lying. I see. Then tomorrow you will accompany me to the border and meet with the Uchiha clan. Your bonds with the Uchiha heir will help in convincing that old twat of joining sides. Both men snickered at Bitsuma as he called the Uchiha head an old twat. I don't mind. I did promise Madara I would see him again soon anyway. That's great. I'll send Percy and one of my sons later to tell you of the outcome. A pleasure seeing you again, Shusuke. TCH. How troublesome. Whatever you say, just send Percy back later for dinner. My clan would like to meet someone like him. Bitsuma nodded as Shusuke followed them outside. Of course. It'll be a hassle explaining this to the kids, but all right. Might as well have someone outside the clans bonding with all of us. Both men laughed as they parted ways, Shusuke staying behind as Percy sulkily waved goodbye from beside Bitsuma. Thanks for making plans for me. Anyone walking by could have heard the heavy sarcasm dripping off the son of Poseidon's words. Bitsuma had the decency to look away sheepishly as he scratched his cheek. My apologies, I didn't mean to do so. It's just that with you forming ties with all the clan heads and their families as soon as possible would be ideal for all of us as a whole. The idea of becoming the first shinobi village won't seem so impossible now, and we would all stop fighting amongst ourselves. Percy sighed. Bitsuma's words did hold truth to them, but he was tired and didn't want to be used as a pawn again. It's fine, just don't do it again. Bitsuma hurriedly nodded. It wouldn't do to anger the man after all. Hashirama will be excited. Why? Bitsuma frowned, not understanding why his son would be excited. He'll be able to be with his friend without hiding. At this, Bitsuma raised his head from where he had been staring at the ground, and looked at Percy with alarm. What friend? But all he got was a smile from Percy, getting the same treatment he had given the man earlier. Percy laughed lightly as Bitsuma looked dejected, much as Hashirama did sometimes. Percy smiled as he looked ahead. A shinobi village, you say? That doesn't sound so bad. If anything, things are looking better than they did in those memories he had seen from the boys. Percy sighed. What a drag. Okay, finished another one. What do you guys think? This one was a bit hard to do as I don't do politics much, so it's probably unrealistic what I did. Anyway, tell me what you think. I'm going to go back to writing. Bye-bye. Watchful Uchihas. After he and Bitsuma had come back home, they weren't at all surprised when they were greeted with 3 restless boys pacing in front of the clan's compound. Percy smiled and called out to them, "Don't tell me you guys killed someone." The 3 Senju brothers had looked up from their pacing and froze for just a moment before they attacked Percy. "The hell you talking about, old man?" Percy frowned as he hugged them. "Anyway, who you calling an old man? I'm only a couple of years older than you." At this, all of the Senju brothers' sweat dropped nervously. Hashirama scratched his head in confusion, bowl-cut hair slightly disappearing as the tips grew longer. "How old are you then?" "I'll have you know, I've recently turned 17. Itama looked focused as he thought about it for a bit. "That means you're older than Hashirama by 4 years, Tobirama by 5, and me by 8 years? Yep. See, I'm not that old except maybe to you, Itama. Hashirama is 13, Tobirama is 12, and Itama is 9. They didn't really explain the age difference, and if they did and I got it wrong, sorry." While Itama was slightly pouting in annoyance, both of his elder brothers had this stranger glint in their eyes as they realized that Percy wasn't that much older than them. Considering the rate at which they were growing, they could end up even taller than Percy, and then they would be able to have. "I see you've forgotten about your father. Instantly all three boys stiffened and turned to look at their father, who was watching them with a raised eyebrow, as they hugged Percy tight around the waist as they completely forgot his existence. "My apologies, father. Sorry, dad. Sorry." Just as Bitsuma was about to reprimand his sons for speaking to him so casually in front of a powerful guest, Percy laughed and ruffled the heads of both Hashirama and Tobirama as he smiled at Itama mischievously. Now, why don't we all calm down? Bitsuma, would you like to tell them the news?" Bitsuma sheepishly smiled as his sons tilted their heads at him, confusion visible on their childish faces as they looked at him for answers. "Well, we just came back from meeting with the head of the Nara clan, and we discussed their clan joining the first shinobi village we had planned on creating, but only after we get the Uchihas to join as well. The other clans will join easily after seeing the Uchiha and Senju clan united under a single village. All Percy and I have to do now is convince the Uchihas of joining, and even that shouldn't be too hard seeing as Percy here has made a friend out of the Uchiha heir. After we convince the Uchihas of joining, there will be peace for all of the clans. There will be no more wars, we'll be able to live peacefully." Bitsuma could only wonder what his sons' reactions would be as they stared blankly at him. Percy standing behind them as his brows furrowed, looking as if he had trouble understanding everything Bitsuma had just said. "Peace?" Everyone turned to look at Hashirama, who had his head down, black hair covering his eyes as his entire body trembled. Percy looked at Bitsuma in worry as he moved to place a hand on Hashirama's shoulder, only for him to flinch back as the dark-eyed boy abruptly raised his head and let everyone see his teary eyes, mouth a trembling line as Hashirama struggled to see through watery eyes. "Hashirama?" Hashirama ignored Bitsuma as he continued to ask, "We'll finally have peace? We'll finally join all the clans together to create the first shinobi village? I'll finally be able to be with my friend without having to fear for any watching eyes? We'll finally stop this war." Both men stared speechlessly at the trembling boy, ebony eyes teary-eyed as his tiny fists clutched at his shirt with such sentiment, it made Bitsuma tear up a bit. His sons didn't deserve to have to live in an era of war and hate, didn't deserve to have any more of their siblings die because of a petty rivalry with the Uchihas. It was true that they had both killed each other's clan members and personal family members several times, and yet instead of talking out their problems with one another, they continued to endanger their children, and it was hurting them all in the long run. Bitsuma walked towards Hashirama slowly and raised his hand, only for his weary eyes to sadden further as his son flinched away from him, dropping to his knees instead as he gently cradled Hashirama's face. "I'm sorry." Hashirama could only watch wide-eyed as his father dropped onto his knees in front of him and apologized. What? Why?" Bitsuma frowned sadly as he closed his eyes and sighed. "I should have seen how this was affecting you all. Instead, I continued to let my hate for the Uchihas grow after they killed Kawurama, and I let it get in the way of our family. For that, I shall always be sorry. Forgive me for failing this family." By the end of it all, Bitsuma was crying silently as he allowed his emotions to get the better of him, something he had told his sons repeatedly to never do, as emotions were useless and got in the way of being a good shinobi. Percy slowly moved to the back as Hashirama hugged his father's head close to him, arms wrapped around his shoulders as his other brothers joined in on the hug quietly, all of them crying as they crowded around their father. All of them weeping for things that they hadn't been allowed to grieve for, crying for the people they lost, the family they lost. They cried and didn't stop for a long time. As Percy let the family have their private moment, he thought back to all the things he had learned from Shusuke Nara. He might not have let it show, but he had seen his memories, and what he saw gave him so much knowledge, he almost didn't know what to do with it. Thankfully for him, though, Shusuke was as intelligent as Athena and her kids. Had Percy not known better, he would have guessed Shusuke was a child of Athena. And so he knew exactly what to do when he carefully slipped away from the grieving family and deeper into the forest, heading directly towards the river he had met Madara at. Percy tried not to feel guilty as he left the family of Senju behind, but well, they were clearly busy, and from Shisuke's memories and thoughts, he could easily convince the Uchihas of joining the Senju and Naras to create the very first shinobi village. He would have to sacrifice one of his secrets though, and he'd rather it be him than anyone else. It would be like paying back the Senju for everything they had done for him. It was easier if he thought like that. Arriving at the river, Percy was met with the sight of one tired-looking Uchiha. "Madara, are you all right?" The Uchiha in question took longer than Percy would have liked to respond back as he sluggishly raised his head from where he sat resting against the base of an old tree. "Percy? What are you doing here? I thought you said Hashirama was going to be here?" Percy frowned as he worriedly scanned Madara for any visible injuries, finding it concerning when he found none, and Madara continued to look at him with dazed eyes, his slurred words from before coming back to mind as Percy walked towards the boy. Paying no mind to Madara's dazed and confused stare as he walked over the running river, Percy stood over Madara as the boy looked up at him helplessly. "I'll get you out here. Come on, let's go." Grunting slightly from having to pick up Madara's dead weight, Percy places Madara's head onto his shoulder as he placed his arms over his neck, lifting Madara from under his legs, his arms carrying his weight as Madara groaned from being moved so suddenly. Where are we going?" "Back home, obviously." Madara frowned from over his shoulder. "My home?" "Yep." "I don't think that's a very good idea. How do you even know where the Uchiha compounds are? They're very well hidden." Percy bumped the back of Madara's head with his own as he smiled softly. "I have good senses." Madara hummed lightly as he struggled to keep his eyes open, having not been able to sleep after his meeting with the mysterious man now carrying him. His mind hadn't let him do so as all he could think about was the warmth the man had excluded unconsciously. "Can I sleep a little?" Percy didn't even hesitate. "Yeah, of course. I'll wake you up when we get there, okay?" Madara's only answer was to tighten his arms around Percy's neck, breathing in his intoxicating scent as he let his eyes drift close. Listening carefully to the soft, nearly inaudible, exhales and inhales of air as Madara stayed limp in his arms. Percy sighed. He hadn't left the Senjus for this. But Percy had to admit, he had missed Madara's comforting presence against his own, although he wished he hadn't come across the boy so defenseless. Had he been anyone else, Madara wouldn't have been alive right now. Thankfully, things hadn't come to that, and Madara was now safe within Percy's arms. Hopefully, his father didn't kill Percy from any misunderstandings he might have after seeing his son like this. Percy could heal Madara right now, but if he did, Madara would ask many questions and he didn't have time to do that right now. However, as Percy was lost in his thoughts, Madara safely tucked in his arms, the demigod failed to notice the dark narrowed eyes watching him from the trees as the person stared at him for a moment longer, eyes flickering to the person in his arms before they disappeared from sight. Running ahead to warn the others of his arrival. The Uchiha heir unconscious in his arms, unharmed but unresponsive. Percy would never know what hit him when the person watching him warned the Uchiha clan leader of his whereabouts as well as the person he had with him. The heir of the Uchiha clan. Son of Tajima Uchiha, head of the Uchiha clan. Poor Percy. You should have stayed with the Senjus. Except that he didn't and was now walking towards a place full of dangerous shinobi, all of which were ready to kill him need be, as the life of the Uchiha heir was the top priority. And so as Percy headed towards the hidden Uchiha compound, Madara's father headed towards him, a large group of the best shinobi his clan had, following right behind him. Percy was thinking. Madara was sleeping, and Tajima was running. Although luckily for Percy, the person having caught sight of him had told the Uchiha clan leader of the interaction between the stranger and his son, how Madara had calmly allowed himself to fall asleep in the stranger's presence. And that confused Tajima greatly, for his son would never allow himself to fall asleep in anyone's presence unless it was Izuna, and since Izuna wasn't there, this stranger headed towards them must be very special if Madara let himself be so vulnerable in his company. Tajima was glad in a way that Madara had let himself relax around this stranger. It was rare for his son to relax anywhere other than by his brother's side, and even then he was still tense and ready to attack. Heck, Madara rarely smiled, And here he was letting a stranger carry him back home with a peaceful smile on his face, or at least, according to what his scout had told him. Tajima felt himself grow excited. It's been a long time since he felt the urge to meet someone and not kill them for annoying him. This man would do good to watch out. Tajima was coming for him. Alright. Done for the day. JK. I'll get back to writing in a bit. I'm afraid I couldn't update yesterday as I had a sudden family emergency and well, you know how it is. Anyway, I have many chapters planned out already. All I'm doing now is just adding details and fixing mistakes, although I probably left a lot still. Sad, but okay. Well then, bye-bye. Choosing travelers. Tajima found himself speechless as he caught sight of the stranger holding his son so carefully as if he was the most precious thing in the world. The dark-haired man was walking carefully as to not disturb his son's sleep, and the thing that surprised Tajima the most was how Madara looked so at peace with himself. Madara had never looked like that in all his life. Not even by Izuna's side, and that was saying something. Whatever this man came here for, Tajima would do well to listen. If nothing else but for his son's happiness as he watched Madara snuggle closer to the handsome stranger. He might not always look like it, but he cared for his sons greatly, and it had been hard on him to lose some of them in war. But if this man was the key to giving his sons all the happiness he had deprived them of, then so be it. Tajima would hear this man out and he would get him to stay by his son's side. Even if he had to force the man into doing so, Madara deserved to be happy after everything that he and his brother had been through. Tajima was sure Izuna would like the stranger as well. So everything considered, the only possible downside to this whole arrangement would be how the stranger reacted. How he reacted would be the key as to whether his sons would finally be allowed to experience happiness or not. The Uchiha clan leader could only hope he wouldn't have to force the scarred stranger into anything. Focusing his attention back towards the man carrying his son, Tajima silently signaled the other Uchiha shinobis to slowly start surrounding the man, all the while staying out of sight as they blocked the man's every possible form of escape. If he wanted to escape, he would have to go straight towards Tajima, as he was the only one without a partner, and if the man decided to run, well, Tajima wasn't the Uchiha clan leader for nothing. It was time for Tajima to greet the man. Crack! Percy's head snapped up from where he had rested it against Madara's own, mind racing as adrenaline pulsed through his veins, eyes instantly finding dark ones staring back at him. Eyes narrowing, Percy turned to run before a memory surfaced abruptly into his mind, body flinching at the sudden shock. Are you Madara's father? The short-haired man attempted to smile charmingly but came off rather creepy as Percy held Madara's sleeping body closer. Perhaps the memories were wrong. Yes, that's right. I'm afraid I'll have to excuse his current behavior. Percy frowned confused as he looked down at Madara's sleeping form, letting Tajima and the other hidden shinobi see as comical realization showed openly on his face, mouth opening slightly as he made a silent "oh." Tajima smirked. Had his sons been a little older? But alas, they weren't. Such a shame. At least the Senju hadn't gotten to the man first. Now that would have been frustrating. The Senju had been having a bit of a winning streak in the recent battles between them, and well, the Uchihas hated losing. It was a good thing the scouts had seen Madara with the man and ran to inform him. Tajima would have been downright murderous had he failed to meet this intriguing man. Opportunities such as this one were rare and almost always favorable to the one getting such a chance. My bad. I didn't mean to make it seem like you were the bad guy. I just had to make sure you weren't someone trying to kill me. At this, Tajima raised an eyebrow as he glanced discreetly at one of his hidden shinobi, something that wasn't missed by Percy, who tensed again, and signaled them to search the area for any other stragglers, making it so that it was just Tajima and Percy, seeing as his son was dead to the world at the moment. And why would someone want to do that, if I may ask? Percy grinned weakly as his eyes followed the running ninja, distractingly saying, who wouldn't want to? Now Tajima was confused. He could see the advantages of killing the man. He would bet his life on the man, thinking he had his power hidden. Anyone with half a brain could see that the man basically radiated power, but he could see even more disadvantages at killing the man than not doing so. The man was a valuable asset to anyone with or without power. Killing the man wouldn't be a good thing in the long run. Tajima also had a feeling that if anyone tried to mess with the man, they wouldn't come back alive to tell the tale. Oh, yeah, I forgot to mention it, but I was hoping I could talk to you about something. Can I? I don't see why not, although I suspect your arms are getting tired of holding such dead weight after so long. Why don't you hand Madara over to his old man? I might not look like it, but I can still carry twice my size. We can talk as we walk back to the compounds. Yes? Percy hesitantly nodded before deciding to trust the man and handing Madara over to his father, Madara's body leaving behind a large vast coldness. Percy shivered. He should have taken a sweater or something before he left the Senjus. I'm afraid I didn't get your name. You are. Oh, sorry. I forget to introduce myself sometimes. Percy Jackson. A pleasure to meet you. Tajima smiled amusedly as he listened to the man rant a little before finally introducing himself. Percy Jackson. What a strange name. The pleasure's all mine. Tajima Uchiha, leader of the Uchiha clan. Percy almost smacked himself in the face for being this close to saying, I know. Oblivious to Percy's internal dilemma, Tajima continued, what was his son eating? What was it you wanted to speak about? I was wondering if you could maybe join the Senju into creating the first shinobi village? What? Both men winced at the loud outburst, looking to see if Madara had woken up, sighing in relief when he didn't even twitch. Tajima scowled angrily at Percy as he adjusted his sleeping son, lifting him higher onto his back as he started to slip. What are you implying, Jackson? If you knew of the hatred each clan has for the other, you would know that the idea of living alongside each other peacefully is something only a fool would dream of. Percy rubbed the ridge of his nose as he sighed. Gods, this was hard. Couldn't the fates have sent the Furies to make him clean or something? Look, I know you guys don't like each other, but what about your kids? Do you really want them to grow up in a crossfire of death and hatred when they could just as easily live peacefully and happily, as kids should? Tajima frowned. This man might as well have a silver tongue with how well he was using his words. Even if there was a way for both clans to live alongside each other peacefully, how would you convince the other clans to join? Percy laughed sarcastically. Are you serious? This war going on between both Senju and Uchihas is the only thing keeping the other clans from forming the first shinobi village. If you guys would just stop fighting for just a second, you would see that the other clans are afraid of what the Senju and Uchiha clans can do to them were they to decide to form a village without any of you. Both clans are destroying any chances of happiness and peace for any of the other clans. Tajima almost let his son fall to the ground as he could only gape at Percy in shock. The man had just outright called him out for his utter bullshit. Not only his and the Uchihas, but the Senjus as well. The HTE between the two powerhouses was destroying the other clans and any hope they had for peace. Tajima's hate for his old rival, Bitsuma of the Senju, was getting in the way of the other clan's happiness, in the way of Tajima's people's happiness. Tajima was a fool for having not seen this earlier. An even bigger fool for insulting the man that had been forced to make him see the ugly truth of his and Bitsuma's deeds. He did not deserve such kindness from such a powerful man. Bowing his head, Tajima apologized on his and his clan's behalf. I'm sorry. I was so blinded by my hate for the Senju that I failed to see how it was affecting the others. I sincerely give you my thanks for showing me the wrongs of my ways and my clans. Even if it takes all my life to do so, I will repay my debt to you. Percy's previously narrowed eyes softened as Tajima apologized sincerely, clenched fists uncurling slowly as Percy released all of the building tension from his body. He had been tensing as if preparing for battle as he tried not to scream at Tajima for being so insolent, and he almost wished Bitsuma was here so he could lecture the man as well. After all, Tajima wasn't the only one in the wrong. It's okay. I wish you had realized this sooner. I haven't felt so much stress in a long time. I was about to get physical for a bit there. You're lucky you realized what you were doing, otherwise. Percy let the threat fall empty as he watched Tajima pale slightly and edged his body away from him as he nodded fearfully. Okay then. Any questions? But Suma and his clan have already agreed with forming a village with you guys, the Naras as well. Tajima could only frown as he thought about what the Senju had been doing behind his clan's back, only to flinch as he caught sight of Percy's knowing stare. It would be best if he remembered all that Percy had forced into his mind, pushing his worries to the back of his mind. Tajima asked quietly as to not disturb his son, "Have you decided who's going to go personally meet with the other clans who haven't been asked to join yet?" Percy shook his head as he continued walking, finally reaching the Uchiha compounds, letting Tajima lead the way as the group of ninja from before caught up to them and were quietly following them as to protect them better need be. "We had to take care of you guys first. Without you agreeing, none of the others would have. Had they decided to join without you already doing so, you would have cut ties with all those that joined, and that's bad for everyone and you know it. Your clan is one of the most wealthy for being able to trade with literally every clan, even those that hate you. So we didn't really plan on sending anyone specific to ask the other clans to join, well other than me, and even that was only because the Nara's head thought it would be wise to send me along with whoever else came." Tajima nodded in understanding as he agreed with what Percy had said. His clan would have ended all those that joined without their consent. Both were quiet as they entered the main house, and Tajima left to place Madara in his bed, coming back quickly to share his opinions with the waiting man. "I don't mind sending Madara along with you. I'm sure Bitsuma is thinking of sending his 2 older sons to come along as well. If only to watch mine, the bastard." Scratching at the dark underside of his short hair, Tajima could only smile sheepishly as he stretched out his tired limbs, sighing when he heard several pops, Percy glaring at him once more for his attitude against the Senju. "I just understand how we're going to convince my clan of accepting this idea." Percy sighed tiredly. "About that?" Tajima looked at Percy curiously, brows arched perfectly in question. "I'm very powerful and I can demonstrate that to your clan if you want. If necessary convincing is needed, I will." Locking eyes with Tajima as the latter nodded for him to continue, Percy said one last thing that shocked even Tajima himself. "I will marry one of your own if I have to." Done. The story is finally moving on, and soon you guys will see just how this ends for Percy. It's kind of sad if you ask me, but oh well. Anyways, I'm off. I'll update tomorrow again, twice if I'm lucky. Bye bye. Grave misunderstanding. Tajima could only gape at the serious-looking man sitting across from him as he sipped his tea, waiting for the shocked man to react to his proposal. "I can't let you do that. I'll talk to my clan, but you don't have to sell yourself like that. There has to be another way. Why would you even think that? Just showing us your strength will be sufficient. They won't need any more convin." "They will." Percy cut off Tajima's panic-induced rant as he set his cup of tea down, stopping the short-haired man in his tracks as he locked eyes with Percy's own. "You know that they'll try to control my power for themselves, and I haven't even met them yet. If they feel even just a bit of my power, they will try to marry me off to one of their own children. Your council doesn't just let power walk away from them. If I need to, I will. I just want you to decide who it's going to be, please." Tajima noticed the man's scarred hands shaking as they wrapped their long fingers around the cup containing tea, eyes pleading desperately for him to help the man out. Percy was scared, and he wanted Tajima to help him, to comfort him by choosing who it was gonna be that married the man. Tajima felt a lump of emotion grow in his throat as he dryly swallowed. He felt like smacking his council members for being the way they were. Percy was right. They wouldn't let power just walk away. They would force it to stay and collaborate. "Okay. If it comes to that, I'll find someone. I promise." Percy sighed in relief as the tension seeped out of his shoulders and drooped down towards the table as he shook from the effort not to cry. The fates had forced him into helping these people. His fatal flaw was at fault as well. If he could just stop caring so God's damn much. "I don't want to do this. Please don't make me do this. Forcing someone to marry me just so that the Uchiha clan would have access to my power. I don't want that to happen." "Why? Why me?" Tajima didn't know what to do as he saw the demigod break down in front of him. He had never been one for comforting, and it was costing him now. So all Tajima could do to help Percy was to reach his hand out to grip the man's scarred hand and tighten his grip when the shaking wouldn't stop. "It's okay. I'll help you. Percy could only nod as he kept his head down against his folded arms, hand clutching Tajima's tightly as Percy struggled to keep from crying out. Life was so unfair. And it was. As Percy cried in the quiet company of the Uchiha clan leader, and Madara slept only rooms away, the Senju clan was just barely noticing the demigod's absence, and they were both an equal mix of angry and worried. Whoever decided to take the man away, they had better hope that Kami could save them. Slow down. We'll find him soon enough, but you have to calm down. The three Senju brothers were so mad with anger and worry that they could not stop themselves from turning on their father and downright growling at him, snarls wide on their childish faces, eyes glowing in pure rage. All in all, it was a disturbing image from their usual selves. But Suma couldn't help but step back unconsciously as his hand went for his sword, his sons too far gone in madness to notice. Calm down. How do you expect us to calm down when someone has Percy? We need to find him now. Hashirama's hair was untamed and sticking out in all different directions after having run his hand through it for the umpteenth time since they discovered the lack of presence of a certain sea-green-eyed man. None of his brothers did anything to calm him down, seeing as they were just about the same as him at the moment. The one thing all had in common was the wild look in their eyes as fear and panic swirled beneath the overpowering anger. But Suma didn't even try to get them to calm down after that. He didn't want to fight Hisons after all, and instead of trying to get them to slow down, he opted to follow them silently from behind as they all followed Tobirama, who had apparently found a track leading in Percy's direction. At least Suma hoped that was the direction the track was leading to. If not, Kami have mercy on whatever poor soul his sons ended up finding. Tobirama's hands twitched to get his sword and just cut down anything in his path as he followed the only track he had found after having noticed the missing person from the group. He had looked up from the heartwarming hug to see what the scarred man was doing when he noticed the man wasn't even there. His family had only watched in confusion as he had ripped away from the hug to swing around in both confusion and fear, the man he was looking for nowhere to be seen. The white-haired boy had then run towards the Senju's home as he looked in every room possible, dropping to his knees in defeat as he came back outside. Percy was missing. Tobirama, dark ruby eyes, had looked up in a dazed look as Tobirama shook his head. Percy's gone. His siblings had flinched violently at the revelation as they, in turn, looked around to try and spot the man, eyes twitching when they failed to do so. His father, on the other hand, had only smiled and laughed slightly as he amusedly said, "I'm sure he just went for a walk to give us some privacy. He won't be long now." Except that they had waited for several long agonizing minutes and nothing, Percy never once appearing in their sights in the time that they had waited for him to show himself. At this point, everyone was worried, including his father as he frowned and his eyes narrowed in suspicion. It didn't take long after that for Tobirama to find a track, and he all but ran in its direction, heart thumping loudly in his aching chest as he forced his legs to go faster, his brothers not far behind him. But Suma had stared in shock at the direction his sons had run off to and did nothing but gape for a couple of seconds before he snapped out of it and ran to follow them, mind racing with endless possibilities as to what could have happened to the kind and gentle man he had recently met. And so here they were, running after a possible lead that could take them to Percy, legs burning as they forced themselves to keep going. Everything was well until they came to the river and the lead disappeared. Harsh breaths were the only thing one could hear in the quiet clearing as his sons continued to push themselves in anger. They had to find the man. They had to find him, and so his sons barely waited for a rather reluctant nod from their father to go ahead and cross the river and into Uchiha grounds as they looked around for another lead. This time it was Itama who called out as he found another possible trail leading towards Percy. "Come on. He can't be far now," and so Itama raced into the other side of the forest, barely waiting for his brothers to catch up, before turning and basically sprinting to where the trail was pointing at. But Suma sighed as he followed his anxious sons. He must be getting old if he was already getting out of breath. He hoped this wasn't the case, for if it was, one of his sons would be forced to become clan leader and they were all still too young to take on such responsibilities. The dark-haired man huffed in annoyance as he forced himself to keep going. Percy was bound to appear somewhere. As Batsuma caught up to his sons again, he frowned and narrowed his eyes as he realized they were heading deeper into Uchiha territory. Percy had said something about being friends with the Uchiha heir. Had the Uchihas taken advantage of Percy's kindness and kidnapped him for themselves? Those power-hungry bastards. He shouldn't have listened to Percy. With newly found anger, Batsuma scowled and determinedly headed to what he assumed was the Uchiha's compounds. He should have paid heed to his son's concern for the missing man earlier. Now, because of his ignorance, an innocent man was probably suffering from his inactions. Batsuma would deal with Tajima if he had to. And so with that, the Senju family angrily headed towards the Uchiha compounds as Hashirama hoped Madara had nothing to do with Percy's disappearance. Tajima sneezed as he furrowed his brows. Was someone cursing him? Percy looked up from his position on his sleeping arms as puffy red eyes twinkled slightly in amusement, lips twitching upwards as he fought to keep from smiling. Both men smiled as their interlaced hands squeezed each other in comfort. Percy had finally calmed down and the dread of what was sure to come had died down to just a small shimmer. Tajima wasn't so bad at comforting him. He was glad he didn't have to do this alone. He hoped he wouldn't have to. Percy was praying to all the gods he knew to please let the Uchiha clan be satisfied with his show of power, that he wouldn't need extra convincing to get them to agree to join the Senju under the first Shinobi village. Just as Percy was about to thank Tajima for silently comforting him, Madara burst into the room and stared at Percy wide-eyed as his pale cheeks started to redden. A smaller boy behind Madara as he clutched at his dark blue sleeve. Percy recognized him to be Izuna Uchiha, Madara's little brother, and now that he thought about it, Izuna kind of looked like Sasuke Uchiha, a boy that appeared in both Tobirama's and Hashirama's memories later on when they were resurrected by a creepy-looking snake guy. The snake wasn't even that bad, he was actually pretty good-looking in a weird way. Gods, what was happening to Percy? Before anyone could get a word out, loud shouts and clanging of metal against metal were heard loudly from outside the house. Percy was instantly on his feet and heading towards the door when all of a sudden a hand gripped his wrist tightly and stopped him in his tracks. Looking back with narrowed eyes, Percy saw Tajima had gotten to his feet as well and had moved to stop him from going into any unnecessary danger when his guards would take care of it. Madara had also moved forward, hand on the sword strapped to his side. Madara had put it on as he rushed to see if he had seen Percy in a dream or not, a scowl on his face, and his eyes narrowed dangerously at the hand around Percy's wrist. Izuna had also tensed but at the sounds coming closer, moving to hide behind his tense older brother as he reached for his small dagger which was hidden in his sleeve. Just as Percy was about to wrench his wrist out of Tajima's hand, mouth open to remind the man that he was just as capable of defending himself as any other shinobi, the door burst open as it was kicked down forcibly and the Senju family entered the room as they took in the situation. Eyes instantly narrowed further as they took in the way Percy's eyes were red and puffy, wrist tightly held in Tajima's hand as he looked to have tried and stopped Percy from leaving. Hashirama's eyes widened in betrayal as he took in Madara's scowl and his hand on his sword as his brother held a dagger behind him. It was true, the Uchihas had kidnapped Percy and were now trying to keep him here. But the Senjus had arrived and they weren't going to leave without the sea-green-eyed man. They would die trying otherwise. Another chapter done. Personally, I don't know how to feel about making Percy marry someone just to convince the Uchihas into agreeing to join the first shinobi village, but unless it's Madara, well, we'll have to see how things go first. Before making assumptions. I'm off then, time to write some more. Bye-bye. Terrifying turn as ghosts torment a hero. The hell do you think you're doing? Tobirama didn't even try and hide his disdain at the present Uchiha's, eyes looking Percy up and down to check for any injuries as he kept his hand on his sword, ready to attack at a moment's notice. Madara, instead of shouting like his younger brother, Hashirama had opted to whisper lowly, watching as Madara looked at him with narrowed eyes, moving closer to Percy and his father as his brother followed his lead. Hashirama felt his hope breaking. Madara had betrayed him, had betrayed Percy and was now ready to attack him if he tried to get what was originally his. Anger overtook hurt and betrayal as Hashirama glared at Madara. He wasn't about to let his friend win. "I should be the one asking you that, child. What do you think you're doing here? How did you even find this place?" Tajima was understandably angry. After all, it wasn't every day someone broke into your house so rudely. What did the Senju think they were doing? This was his house, his territory. And they dared step foot into it. They better have a good explanation for this atrocious act they dared commit in his presence, and in front of his sons no less. How distasteful of them. Tajima, what matters right now is explaining what you're doing to that man. He's with us, and the fact that you would go so far as to steal him away from us while he was in our territory, you have no shame. But Suma's upper lip curled up in disdain as he basically spit the words out his mouth. The man in question, however, was offended with the now obvious behavior of the other man. Percy was right. This attitude of theirs was just plain disgusting. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." The scarred man was cut off as Tajima calmly responded to his old rival, Bitsuma Senju. "We have no shame. You insolvent fool, it is you and your family that are the ones trespassing into the Uchiha's territory. This man here? He came to us on his own free will, and you dare accuse my family and I of having forced him against his will to come here. You mustn't think so lowly of us, Bitsuma Senju. Unlike the Senju, we have class and honor, something you currently aren't showing. This is my home and I will not have you disrespect me in it, so either get your family to calm down or get the hell out." The man stuck between it all, Percy Jackson, was discreetly impressed that Tajima would choose to talk things out with the Senju rather than just diving headfirst into an unnecessary battle. Percy gave the man a whistle of appreciation inside the privacy of his mind. The man had class all right, and he clearly wasn't afraid to show it. As Bitsuma stared wide-eyed at the Uchiha clan leader, Tajima's sons were staring proudly at their father. He was doing his clan justice right now. Whatever had happened between him and the laid-back man, it had done him good, and they appreciated the scarred man for doing what he did. Bitsuma's kids, on the other hand, were a wide range of ashamed, angry, embarrassed, and guilty. The man was right. They had just barged into someone else's home with false accusations, and instead of asking for clarification, they attacked both verbally and physically, seeing as the guards outside were unconscious or on the verge of doing so. "I apologize. We should have waited for you to explain things instead of just assuming the worst." Tajima watched with narrowed eyes as his face stayed fierce with anger, and he stayed still while Bitsuma bowed in apology, his three sons hesitating before following their father's example. The Uchiha clan leader said nothing for several long tense seconds before huffing in annoyance and turning to sit back down, his sons following as they sat at their father's left side. The son of Poseidon reluctant to follow before he too turned to follow the man as his sons had done as well, taking his spot beside Tajima's right side. The Senju family stayed bowing for another moment before they straightened and slowly sat down in front of the Uchihas, plus a guiltily smiling man as he scratched his neck nervously. Gods, this wasn't awkward at all. The two clan leaders stared at each other in tense silence before Tajima sighed and spoke clearly. "Well then, don't you want answers? Ask away." "What do you mean by Percy going to you guys willingly?" It was Hashirama who spoke this time, although he looked torn between looking at Tajima or at his friend, Madara Uchiha. Bitsuma didn't even reprimand Hashirama for speaking before him. He, as his father, had finally figured out what Percy had meant by his son having a certain friend. His son was friends with the Uchiha's heir. He wasn't even mad. He had the right to make his own friends after all, especially after Bitsuma's neglect as a father. Bitsuma just wished his son hadn't been afraid to tell him.